Hannah Brooks pressed her back flat against the hedge and whispered the most humiliating sentence she had ever spoken out loud in her 31 years of life. "I don't need him to love me. I just need a boyfriend for tomorrow." 6 feet away on the other side of that hedge, Caleb Morgan's hammer stopped mid-swing. He didn't breathe. He didn't move. He just stood there in the dark with a nail between his fingers and the terrible weight of someone else's secret settling over him like Georgia humidity in July. And what he did next, what this quiet, careful man who hadn't reached for anything in 4 years decided to do. The very next afternoon is the reason you're going to watch every single second of this story. If you're watching from somewhere in this great country tonight, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if nobody's told you yet, welcome. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let's get into it. The toolbox hit the porch boards at 7:43 on a Friday evening, and the sound it made was exactly as loud and graceless as a man who had just heard something he absolutely was not supposed to hear. Caleb Morgan stood completely still after it fell. He looked down at the scattered wrenches and loose screws spread across the weathered wood of his front porch, and he thought very deliberately about whether he could pretend it hadn't happened. Whether he could crouch down, collect every tool with quiet precision, and resume working on the broken railing post as though his ears had somehow failed him in the last 60 seconds. He could not. The hedge between his property and Hannah Brooks's property was thick old azalea bushes that had been growing along that property line since before either of them had moved on to Forsyth Street, but it was not soundproof. It had never been soundproof. He knew that. She knew that. They had both known that for the 18 months they had lived 6 feet apart from each other in the historic Savannah neighborhood, where old houses sat close together on narrow lots, and everybody's lives had a way of leaking through the walls, whether anybody wanted them to or not. He heard the silence on the other side of the hedge stretch out. Then Hannah's voice, very carefully controlled now, said something low into her phone that he couldn't make out. Then another silence. Then the soft sound of someone ending a call. Caleb set the hammer down on the porch railing. He straightened up. He turned toward the hedge with absolutely no idea what he was planning to do or say. And that was when Hannah stepped around the end of the azalea bushes and walked directly into his line of sight. She stopped. He stopped. The porch light from his house fell across her face, and he could see the exact moment she understood. It moved through her expression in stages, the first flash of confusion, then the rapid backward calculation, then the color rising in her cheeks, and the slight lift of her chin that he had come to recognize over 18 months as the thing Hannah Brooks did when she was preparing to be embarrassed with dignity. She was wearing a yellow apron she'd apparently forgotten to take off after closing Honey and Rye that afternoon. There was a smudge of what looked like powdered sugar along her left forearm. Her hair was pulled back in the kind of way that said she'd put it up that morning for practical reasons and hadn't thought about it since. She was looking at him like she wanted the historic Savannah Street to open up beneath her feet and swallow her whole. "Good evening," Caleb said. It was the worst possible thing he could have said. He knew it the moment it came out of his mouth. It was the voice he used with building inspectors and PTA volunteers, polite, measured, professionally neutral, and it was exactly the wrong register for a woman who had just realized her neighbor had overheard her confess to inventing a boyfriend. Hannah's chin went up another quarter inch. "Good evening," she said back in the exact same tone, which told him she was mortified beyond the reach of normal conversation. They stood there for approximately 3 seconds, which felt considerably longer. "Nice night," Caleb added. He genuinely did not know why he kept talking. "It is," Hannah agreed. She was holding her phone with both hands. Now her fingers wrapped around it tight, and she was looking at a point somewhere to the left of his shoulder in the specific way people looked at things that weren't there when they needed to not look directly at a human being. "I should," she started. "I wasn't," he started simultaneously. They both stopped. "I wasn't listening on purpose," Caleb said. "I know." Her voice was very quiet. "I know you weren't." The toolbox. I heard it fall. Another silence, longer this time. "Good night, Caleb," Hannah said. And her voice when she said it was so careful and so controlled and so working very hard to sound like nothing happened. that something in his chest moved in a way he hadn't felt in a long time and wasn't prepared for. "Good night, Hannah." She walked back around the hedge. He listened to her porch door open and then close, and then heard nothing else. Caleb picked up his hammer. He held it for a moment. Then he set it back down and sat on the top porch step instead, because the railing wasn't going anywhere tonight, and he needed to think. Behind him from the porch swing where she had been sitting quietly with a book for the last 20 minutes, his 9-year-old daughter Sophie said, "Dad." "Yeah." "Did Miss Hannah say she needs a boyfriend?" Caleb looked at the dark hedge for a long moment. "She was on the phone," he said. "Private conversation." "But she said it loud enough that you heard it." "She didn't realize I was out here." Sophie considered this with the particular patience of a child who processed things carefully before speaking. That patience was one of the things people always noticed about her. She had her mother's way of thinking before talking, which was a quality Caleb had always admired in Claire, and now sometimes found quietly devastating to observe in their daughter. "Why doesn't Miss Hannah think someone would want to be her boyfriend?" Sophie asked. Caleb stared at the hedge. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. "I don't know, Soph," he said finally. It wasn't entirely true. He had some ideas. 18 months of proximity had given him more than a few ideas about the particular way Hannah Brooks existed in the world. The space she took up, the space she didn't take up. The way she laughed fully and freely when she forgot to be conscious of it, and went slightly careful when she remembered. He had ideas. He just wasn't sure what to do with them. "I think she's nice," Sophie said, returning to her book. "I think she'd be a good girlfriend." "Go inside, Soph." "I'm just saying." Inside. Sophie went inside, taking her book and her opinions with her, and Caleb sat on the porch steps in the July heat and listened to the night sounds of the neighborhood and thought about a woman who had invented a boyfriend rather than walk into a party alone. The thing about Hannah Brooks was that she was genuinely measurably good at her life. She had built Honey and Rye from a Savannah business license and a rented commercial kitchen 4 years ago, and she had done it alone with a small business loan she'd spent 18 months qualifying for, and a recipe book she'd been compiling since she was 12 years old. The bakery wasn't large. 12 tables, a counter with 4 stools, a glass case that she restocked twice a day, but it was hers, and it was good, and the people who found it tended to come back. She remembered her regulars' names. She remembered their orders. She remembered that old Mr. Beaumont from the retirement complex on Abercorn couldn't have refined sugar anymore. So she kept a small batch of stevia-sweetened shortbread in the back that she never put in the case because he would never have accepted it if he'd thought she was making something especially for him. She just handed it to him when he came in on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and he pretended to be surprised every single time, and she pretended to believe him. She left bread on the porches of 3 elderly neighbors who she knew weren't getting out much. She kept a jar of dog treats on the counter that she refilled every week because enough of her customers brought their dogs, that it just made sense, and because she liked dogs, and because it made people smile when she crouched down and talked to their animals like they were small opinionated people who happened to be covered in fur. She was good at her life. She was just not particularly good at the specific part of her life that involved walking into rooms full of people who were related to her. Hannah's family specifically. Her mother Margaret and her younger sister Vanessa existed in a different emotional register than Hannah did. They moved through the world with the particular ease of women who had never had to think very hard about whether they were welcome in a room. Vanessa was 28 and recently engaged to a man named Cole who worked in commercial real estate and had the kind of jawline you saw in magazine ads for watches. Margaret was 63 and still the best-dressed woman at any event she attended, which was every event because Margaret didn't miss events. Hannah loved them. She genuinely loved them. They were her family, and she loved them, and also approximately 45 minutes in their company could reduce her to a state of emotional exhaustion that took days to recover from, because the comments were never mean. They were never outright cruel. They were delivered with perfect love and genuine concern and absolutely no awareness of what they sounded like. Landing. "You have such a pretty face," was the foundational text. It had been the foundational text since Hannah was 14. "Someone will love you for your personality, came second. "You're so brave for wearing that," had entered the rotation sometime in her mid-20s. And beneath all of it, the unspoken question that was actually the only question anyone in her family seemed to care about when they looked at her. "Why are you still single?" Hannah had been asking herself the same question. That was the problem. She had been asking it in the privacy of her own head for years, and the asking had become habitual, and the habit had become weight, and the weight had settled into a particular kind of resignation that looked from the outside like contentment and felt from the inside like something considerably more complicated. And then, 8 months ago, completely out of exhaustion, she had invented Daniel. Daniel was a structural engineer. He lived in Charleston. He traveled a lot for work, which was why he was never available to attend any family events. He was tall. He was kind. He thought Hannah was wonderful exactly as she was, and he did not exist. Hannah had invented him in approximately 4 minutes during a phone call with her mother in November, and she had been maintaining him ever since, with the increasing stress of someone who had started a very small lie and watched it grow into an infrastructure problem. And now, Vanessa's engagement party was tomorrow, and her mother expected Daniel, and Daniel did not exist. This was the situation Hannah had been explaining to her best friend Dara on the phone when Caleb's toolbox hit his porch boards, and the entire conversation became something that a man with a nail in his fingers had accidentally heard. Hannah did not sleep well. She lay in her bed in the upstairs bedroom of her narrow Forsyth Street house and stared at the ceiling and went through her options with the focus of someone working a math problem they already knew had no good solution. She could tell her mother the truth. The truth would create a conversation that she was not emotionally equipped for at 11:30 on a Friday night, or at any point in the foreseeable future. She could invent a last-minute emergency for Daniel. A work crisis. A delayed flight. This was the option she had been cycling through for the past 3 weeks, ever since it became clear that her mother had told approximately 14 relatives that they would finally be meeting Hannah's boyfriend at the party, and the momentum of 14 relatives expecting to meet Daniel had taken on a weight that flight delay was not going to support. She could develop a migraine. This was the nuclear option. This would get her out of the party entirely, would generate a week of concerned phone calls, and would solve absolutely nothing. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about Caleb standing on his porch with a hammer in his hand, looking at her with that particular expression. He had quiet, careful taking in information, and she felt the humiliation move through her again in a wave. She pressed her hands over her face. "You absolute disaster," she told herself into her palms. She fell asleep sometime around 2 in the morning. She woke up at 6 with the alarm, got up, showered, dressed in the clothes she'd laid out for the party. A green wrap dress she'd bought 3 weeks ago and had felt good about until approximately this morning, and drove to the bakery to handle the Saturday morning rush before she had to leave for her mother's house. The Saturday morning rush was busy, which was good because busy meant she didn't have time to think. She made lattes and sliced pound cake and answered the question, "Is this gluten-free?" approximately 9 times with declining patience, and she laughed at the right moments and remembered everyone's names and only checked her phone 3 times to look at the address of the nearest urgent care clinic to see if she could plausibly manufacture a medical situation. She closed at noon. She drove back home. She changed out of her flour-dusted work clothes and put on the green dress and stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom for a long moment. She looked fine. She looked perfectly fine. She looked like a woman who was about to walk into a party and explain to her mother and 14 relatives, and God knew who else, that the boyfriend who did not exist was unable to attend, and she looked like she was dreading every second of it. She picked up her keys. She walked downstairs. She went out her front door and down her porch steps and to her car parked at the curb, and she had her hand on the door handle when she heard footsteps behind her. "Sorry I'm late." Hannah froze. She turned slowly because something in the voice, the calm certainty of it, the complete absence of hesitation, had activated some instinct in her that made her want to see before she processed. Caleb Morgan was walking down his porch steps in a dark jacket over a charcoal gray shirt, his dark hair combed back from his face, his expression carrying that particular quality he had of looking like he had thought about something very carefully and arrived at a decision and was now simply implementing it. Sophie was beside him in a pale blue dress that Hannah recognized. She'd seen it in the back seat of Caleb's car 3 weeks ago, when he'd mentioned they had a school event, and Sophie had told her it was her favorite dress because the color reminded her of the ocean. Hannah stared at them. "What?" she said. It came out flat. Not a question. A data-gathering statement. "You said you needed a boyfriend," Caleb said. He was at the bottom of his porch steps now, walking toward her with the unhurried stride of a man who had made up his mind. "Until tomorrow." Hannah's mouth opened, closed. "I said that on the phone, to my friend. You weren't supposed to." "I know I wasn't supposed to hear it." He stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the small scar along his chin from something he'd mentioned once, a job site incident years ago, and the particular steadiness in his eyes that she had spent 18 months trying not to notice too carefully. "I heard it anyway, and I thought about it." Hannah looked at Sophie. Sophie looked back at her with absolute composure and said, "Technically, tomorrow doesn't end until midnight." Hannah made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a response to having the most surreal experience of her adult life. "Caleb," she said, "you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." His voice was even, not warm in a performed way, just steady. "I want to help, if you'll let me." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her mother's house and 14 relatives, and the question that had been following her for years, and the green dress she'd stood in front of the mirror in that morning, and the man standing in front of her now who had heard the worst thing she'd ever said about herself and had shown up in a jacket anyway. "My family is going to ask you questions," she said. "I figured. Complicated questions. About us. How long we've been—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "My mother is very thorough." "I'm an architect," Caleb said. "I work with details." Sophie, his daughter said, "is an excellent liar when necessary." "Sophie," Caleb said without looking at her. I'm an excellent supporter of complicated situations," Sophie revised. Hannah looked at the sky for a moment. She looked at the green dress she was wearing and thought about the migraine option and the flight delay option and the urgent care option. And then she looked at Caleb Morgan standing in front of her on a Savannah street in a dark jacket on a Saturday afternoon because he had heard something through a hedge and decided it mattered. She let out a long, slow breath. She extended her hand. He took it. His hand was warm and steadier than she expected, which wasn't fair because she was already having enough trouble thinking clearly. "Okay," Hannah said. "Just—" She squeezed his hand once, which she hadn't planned to do. "Just follow my lead." "Always," Caleb said. And Sophie, walking around to the passenger side of Hannah's car, said quietly to herself, with the satisfaction of someone whose plan had worked out exactly as intended, "Finally." Margaret Brooks's historic Savannah home sat on a street lined with live oaks and Spanish moss, 2 stories of white-painted brick with a wraparound porch and a garden in the back that had been the backdrop for more Brooks family photographs than any of them could count. Hannah had grown up in that house. She knew every room in it, every piece of furniture, every photograph in every hallway, and the precise location of every conversational landmine her family had accumulated over 3 decades of loving each other loudly and well, and occasionally without a great deal of awareness of the damage. She also knew the moment she walked into the garden with Caleb's hand in hers, and Sophie walking slightly ahead of them, like a small advance scout, that something had changed about walking into this space. She wasn't alone. That was all it was. That was the whole difference. She had walked into her mother's house 100 times before this, but she had almost always walked in alone, and the aloneness had always announced itself. The moment she arrived, she could see it register on faces, the small recalibration that happened when people looked for the person who was supposed to be beside her and found only her. This time, nobody recalibrated. This time, Aunt Jerry from Augusta looked up from her champagne glass and smiled in a way that reached her eyes, and Hannah realized she had never seen that particular smile directed at her before. It shouldn't have mattered. She told herself firmly that it absolutely should not matter that the presence of a man beside her changed the emotional temperature of a room, because that was exactly the kind of thing she had spent years fighting against internally, and she was not going to capitulate to it now. But her hand was still in Caleb's, and her mother was crossing the garden toward them. Hannah. Margaret Brooks was a tall woman who had maintained excellent posture for 63 years as a point of personal pride, and she moved through her garden with the ease of someone on her own territory. She was looking at Caleb with the measured assessment of a woman who loved her daughter and had extremely specific opinions about who deserved access to her. "Mom." Hannah squeezed Caleb's hand once. "This is Caleb." There was a fraction of a second, very small, almost imperceptible, where Margaret's eyes moved from Caleb's face to Hannah's face and back to Caleb's face, running some internal calculation. "Caleb," she said, "it's wonderful to finally meet you." "It's wonderful to finally meet you too, Mrs. Brooks." His voice was easy, not performed easy, just natural. "Hannah talks about your garden. I can see why." It was the exact right thing to say, and Hannah felt a small surge of something she wasn't prepared to name. "Caleb Morgan," Margaret said, testing the name. "And this must be Sophie," Sophie said, extending her hand. "Sophie Morgan. I'm his daughter. Hannah makes the best cinnamon rolls I've ever had. She puts brown butter in them, which most people don't know is the secret." Margaret looked at Sophie for a moment. Then she smiled, the real one, not the polished one. "I'm going to agree with you completely. Come with me. I'm going to show you the dessert table, and you can tell me if Hannah's influence is anywhere else on it." Sophie went with her, and Hannah watched them go, and then turned to Caleb and said very quietly, "What just happened?" "Your daughter charmed my mother in approximately 11 seconds. She's not my—" "I know." His voice was quiet. Figure of speech. Hannah looked at the garden. Relatives were moving toward them. She could feel it, the gravitational pull of people who had questions and the social permission to ask them. "Caleb," she said, "my family is going to be Hannah." His voice was even. "I've got you." She looked at him. I was already turning toward the first wave of incoming relatives. Her Aunt Patricia, 67, who served on the board of 3 charities and had the interrogation instincts of a congressional hearing, with the calm composure of a man who built structural things for a living and understood how pressure worked. "Caleb, this is my Aunt Patricia." "Patricia." He extended his hand. "I've heard good things." Patricia looked at his hand, then at his face, then at Hannah, with an expression that said she was reserving judgment, but was so far not displeased. "Where exactly did you two meet?" she asked, because Aunt Patricia had never wasted time on small talk. "We're neighbors," Caleb said. "Neighbors." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "For how long?" 18 months. "And you've been—" She made a gesture that encompassed both of them. "For how long?" "We've been figuring it out," Caleb said, which was so precisely accurate that Hannah almost choked. "Figuring it out," Patricia repeated. "Hannah's cautious," Caleb said. His voice was easy. "She takes her time with things she cares about. I respect that about her." Patricia looked at Hannah. Hannah managed an expression she hoped conveyed serenity. "He seems fine," Patricia told her in the tone of someone delivering a preliminary verdict. "I'll talk to him more after dinner." She moved away. Hannah exhaled. "That was terrifying," she said. "That was actually pretty smooth," Caleb said. "She's going to come back with harder questions." "I know. I'm prepared." "Caleb." She turned to him. "You don't know anything about Daniel. You don't know what I told people. You don't know the—" "Who's Daniel?" "The boyfriend I invented." She lowered her voice to a near whisper. "My fake boyfriend. Who you are replacing. He was a structural engineer in Charleston." A small, brief, almost imperceptible thing happened at the corner of Caleb's mouth. "I'm a residential architect." "That's close enough. But if someone asks about Hannah," he looked at her steadily. "I'm not going to pretend to be someone you invented. I'm going to be who I am. If that doesn't answer a question perfectly, we redirect." "My family doesn't redirect easily." "Neither do load-bearing walls," he said. "You work with what's there." She looked at him. She didn't know what to do with him. She'd been his neighbor for 18 months, and she hadn't known what to do with him for most of them, with his particular brand of quiet solidity, with the way he showed up for things, without announcing he was going to show up with the steadiness that should have been boring and somehow never was. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question came out more directly than she'd intended. Caleb looked at the garden for a moment. His jaw worked slightly. "Because I heard something through a hedge that I wasn't supposed to hear, and I spent the rest of the night thinking about it, and by morning I had made a decision." "What kind of decision?" He looked back at her. "The kind you don't talk about, the kind you just make." Hannah held that for a moment. From across the garden, she could see Sophie at the dessert table, with her mother examining something with great seriousness. Margaret was nodding. Sophie was talking with her hands. Hannah's cousin Brenda was materializing to their left, champagne in hand, with the determined energy of someone who had been waiting for this moment since she'd heard there was finally a boyfriend. "Here comes Brenda," Hannah said. "Is she worse than Patricia?" "Brenda asks about your 5-year plan." "I actually have a 5-year plan," Caleb said. "I'm an architect." "For us," Hannah said. "She'll ask for a 5-year plan for us." A pause. "Ah," Caleb said. "Yeah. Yeah." Brenda arrived. "Hannah, oh my goodness, is this him? Is this your Caleb?" "Your Caleb." Hannah processed the phrase. "Brenda, this is Caleb Morgan. Caleb, my cousin Brenda." "Caleb." Brenda shook his hand with genuine enthusiasm. "We've heard so much. Well, not that much. Hannah's been very private, which is so like her, but enough that we all—" She beamed at him. "Where are you from originally?" "Savannah, born and raised," Caleb said. "Oh, wonderful. And you're," Hannah said. "You're in construction." "Architecture, residential. I design houses." "How romantic." Brenda put her hand on Hannah's arm. "Hannah, he designs houses. That's romantic." "Brenda." "What kind of houses?" Brenda asked Caleb. "Mainly renovations of older homes. Historic preservation work. I like restoring things that have good bones." He said it simply, without looking at Hannah, without any awareness, or perhaps with perfect awareness, that she had stopped breathing for a moment. Restoring things that have good bones. "That is the most romantic thing I've ever heard," Brenda said. Caleb glanced at Hannah. She looked back at him. She had absolutely no idea what was happening. The interrogations continued through the cocktail hour, with the relentless momentum of a Savannah summer, inevitable, enveloping, impossible to escape. Uncle Roy asked Caleb about his mortgage, which Caleb answered with the specific patience of a man who understood that older Southern men asked about financial stability the way other people asked about personality. Cousin Terrence asked him about sports, and Caleb held his own on college football in a way that earned him approximately 15 minutes of genuine male social credibility. Hannah's great-aunt Dorothy, who was 81 and had stopped caring what anyone thought, somewhere around her 68th birthday, grabbed Caleb's arm during the cocktail hour and said, "Are you good to her?" with the directness of someone who had watched too many people be unkind to her grandniece. "I'm working on it," Caleb said. Dorothy studied him. "That's the right answer," she said. "The ones who say yes immediately are lying." She released his arm and went back to her champagne, and Hannah, standing close enough to have heard the whole exchange, said nothing. What she noticed, what she couldn't stop noticing, was that every time someone asked Caleb about her, he didn't perform. I didn't say Hannah was beautiful, though he might have said it and gotten away with it. He didn't say she was wonderful, which would have been smooth and empty. He said specific things, specific true things that he had observed in 18 months of living next door to her. And every time he said one, Hannah felt something shift in her chest, in a way she couldn't quite account for. She leaves bread on the porches of neighbors who can't get out much. She remembers things about Sophie without being asked. What she's reading, what her school projects are about, whether she mentioned liking a particular kind of cookie. She laughs differently when she forgets to be careful. The real laugh, you can hear it from next door sometimes. It's loud and a little undignified and completely honest. He said the last one to her Aunt Patricia during dinner, and Patricia looked at Hannah with an expression she had never directed at her before, something closer to envy than concern, and said, "He pays attention." "He does," Hannah said, and she didn't know who she was, more startled by Caleb for meaning it or herself for believing him. The problem arrived at 7:45 in the form of Ryan Mercer, who materialized near the bar in a seersucker blazer with the ease of a man who assumed every room was glad to see him. Hannah saw him before he saw her, which gave her approximately 4 seconds to arrange her face. Ryan was 34, successful in the way people described as doing really well, and had dated Hannah for 11 months 4 years ago. He was charming in the broad, practiced way of someone who had grown up understanding that being liked was a useful social skill. He had been genuinely fond of Hannah in his way. She had known that. She had believed it while they were together. And then, at a company dinner, she wasn't invited to because Ryan had said he thought she might be more comfortable with a quieter night. She had understood something she hadn't been able to ununderstand since. The specific conversation had happened 6 weeks before they broke up in his car outside a restaurant when Ryan had said carefully kindly, with the voice of someone who was trying to be helpful, "I just think if you were a little more health conscious, I'd feel better about introducing you to my colleagues. Not because I care about that stuff, just because they do. You know how it is." She knew how it was. She'd known exactly how it was. And she had spent the subsequent 4 years telling herself that she didn't care, and that he was wrong, and that she was fine. And some days, she had almost believed all three. Ryan turned from the bar and saw her. His face did the small recalibration, the new assessment, and his eyes moved to Caleb beside her and recalibrated again. "Hannah." He walked over with a smile that was genuine, and therefore worse. "You look great." "Ryan." Her voice came out level. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Cole's in my building. Small world." He looked at Caleb. "And you must be Caleb Morgan." Caleb extended his hand. Easy, steady. "Ryan Mercer." They shook. "How do you two know each other?" "We're neighbors," Caleb said. "Neighbors." Ryan smiled. "So you've seen the transformation up close." A beat. A specific, very small beat, in which Hannah felt the familiar contraction in her chest, the one that happened when someone said something that was technically without content, but carried a freight of meaning she was not supposed to acknowledge. "What transformation?" Caleb asked. His voice was completely even. Ryan made a gesture that managed to encompass Hannah without being specific. "Just Hannah's really come into herself. It's great to see." "She hasn't changed," Caleb said. Ryan blinked. "Well, sure, I just meant, I've lived next door to her for a year and a half." Caleb's voice was still easy, still conversational, still carrying no particular edge that Ryan could point to. "She's exactly who she was. She didn't have to change." The silence lasted 3 seconds. Ryan looked at Hannah. Hannah looked back at him. She was fighting very hard to keep her expression neutral because something had just happened inside her chest. Something large and complicated and unexpected, and she was not going to process it in front of Ryan Mercer in her mother's garden. "Right," Ryan said with the smile people use when they've lost a conversational exchange and want to appear as if they haven't noticed. "Anyway, great party. Good to meet you, Caleb." He walked away. Hannah stood very still. Caleb turned to her. She was looking at Ryan's retreating back, and she had the particular expression she got sometimes when something had hit a place she hadn't thought was exposed. "You okay?" Caleb asked. "Yes." She said it automatically. Then, "No, I don't know." He waited. "That man," she said quietly, "told me once that he'd be more comfortable taking me to his company events if I—" She stopped, started again. "He was kind about it. That was the worst part. He was genuinely kind about it." "I know the kind of kind," Caleb said. She looked at him. "The kind that's really just preference dressed up as concern," he said. "I know what that sounds like." Hannah studied him for a moment. "He wasn't a bad person." "No. He just thought I needed to become a different person before I was worth—" She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. "Before he'd be comfortable." "Yeah." Caleb's voice was quiet. "I heard." She looked at the garden. The party was moving around them, her mother's voice carrying from across the lawn. Vanessa laughing at something Cole said. Sophie at the dessert table apparently in extended conversation with Dorothy about something that had them both laughing. She didn't have to change, Hannah said. She said it very quietly, almost to herself. No, Caleb said. She didn't. Hannah let out a slow breath. Thank you, she said, for that. I meant it. I know you did. She turned to face him, and she found that she couldn't quite look at him directly, which was something new and mildly alarming. That's the thing, Caleb. I think I know you meant it. He looked at her steadily. Don't look at me like that, she said. Like what? Like you're trying to figure out what I'm thinking. I'm not trying to figure out what you're thinking, Caleb said. I think I know what you're thinking. She raised her eyebrows. You're thinking this is too much, he said. Too real for something that started because of a toolbox falling over. Hannah didn't say anything. And you're thinking, he continued, that tomorrow I'm going to walk back to my house, and we're going to go back to being neighbors who wave at each other across the hedge, and tonight will be some strange thing that happened once that you'll be able to convince yourself didn't mean anything. The garden noise continued around them. Laughter, someone's phone playing a soft song from inside the house, the clink of glasses. You said until tomorrow, Hannah said. I did. That was the arrangement. It was. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Sophie appeared from the direction of the dessert table, threading through adults with the focused navigation of a child on a mission, and arrived at Hannah's elbow with a small plate containing 2 pieces of something chocolate. Dorothy says these are from the tray you made, she told Hannah. She wanted me to tell you they're better than last year's, and last year's were the best thing she'd had since her husband was alive. Sophie considered. I think that's a very big compliment. It is, Hannah said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. Sophie looked at Caleb, then at Hannah, then at the plate in her hand. I got 2, she said. 1 for each of you. She held out the plate with the careful solemnity of someone offering something important. Hannah took 1. Caleb took the other. Sophie watched them both with the expression of a 9-year-old who knew exactly what she was doing and was choosing not to draw attention to the fact. It's a good party, she said. It is, Caleb agreed. Miss Hannah, Sophie said, do you think you'll keep making the cinnamon rolls even after, she seemed to consider how to finish the sentence. After the party. The question was completely innocent. It landed like a stone in still water. Caleb looked at Hannah. Hannah looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at both of them with the patient expression of a child who had asked a perfectly simple question and was waiting for a perfectly simple answer. Yes, Hannah said. I think so. Sophie nodded satisfied and went back to the dessert table. Hannah and Caleb stood in the garden of her mother's historic Savannah home in the warm July evening, holding pieces of chocolate cake, and the word tomorrow sat between them like something that hadn't been fully decided yet. You should eat that, Caleb said finally. You made it. You eat it, Hannah said. I'm eating mine. Then I'll eat mine. They both ate their cake. The party continued around them, warm and loud, and full of the specific noise of a family, celebrating something. And Hannah looked at Caleb Morgan in the garden light, and she thought about 18 months of living next door to someone, and the particular things he had noticed, and the way he had said she didn't have to change with the same steadiness he brought to everything. And she thought about what she'd said on the phone the night before, which he had heard, and what she hadn't said, which he couldn't have heard, which was the part she hadn't told Dara either. The part that went, I'm tired of walking into rooms already apologizing for taking up space. She hadn't said that out loud. She was almost certain she hadn't said it out loud. The party moved around them, and tomorrow hadn't arrived yet, and Caleb Morgan was still standing beside her, and Hannah Brooks ate her chocolate cake and let herself, for the first time in longer than she could account for, stop apologizing. The drive home was quiet in the way that contained things rather than the way that lacked them. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes out from Margaret's house, and after that, the silence was the specific kind that belongs to 2 adults who have spent a long evening in close proximity and are now navigating the space between what happened and what it means. Hannah pulled into Forsyth Street and parked at the curb and turned off the engine, and neither of them moved for a moment. Thank you, she said. You keep saying that. You keep doing things that warrant it. Caleb looked out the windshield. The street was quiet, the live oaks dark against the summer sky. It's a good family, he said. Your family. They are. She paused. They just... I know. You don't know. No, he said. You're right. I don't know exactly. A pause. But I understand something about it. Hannah turned her head to look at him. He was still looking at the street. Caleb. Her voice was quiet. Why did you really come today? He was silent for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. I heard more than you think, he said. She went very still. Of your phone call. He didn't look at her. Not all of it, but more than just the boyfriend part. Hannah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You said... He stopped, started again. You said you were tired of walking into rooms already apologizing for taking up space. The sentence fell into the car's quiet interior, like something that had been waiting a long time to land. Hannah did not speak. She did not speak for a long time. I heard that, Caleb said, and I recognized it, and I... He finally looked at her. I couldn't fix the toolbox falling. I couldn't fix you hearing me hear something you didn't want heard. But the other part, the part about the rooms... He paused. I thought maybe I could do something about that, for one day, in the back seat. Sophie made a small sound and shifted in her sleep. Hannah looked at this child, who wasn't her daughter, who called her Miss Hannah, who had brought them both pieces of chocolate cake with the grave intentionality of a small person with a specific goal, and she felt something large and fragile and completely unplanned take up residence in her chest. Your job is officially finished, she said. Her voice was steady, careful. The party's over. Tomorrow is technically today. You're done. Good, Caleb said. He didn't move. She didn't move. The street was quiet, and the summer night pressed against the car windows, and neither of them walked away. And that which should have been the end of something turned out instead to be the beginning. The drive home had felt like the end of something. It wasn't. Caleb carried Sophie inside without waking her, and Hannah stood on her porch and listened to the sound of his door closing. And she told herself very firmly that what had happened tonight was a kindness from a neighbor and nothing more, and that she was going to go inside and take off the green dress and go to sleep. And tomorrow today, technically, since it was past midnight, was going to be a normal Saturday, in which she was simply a woman who owned a bakery and happened to live next door to a quiet, steady man who had done her an enormous favor. She believed this completely for approximately 11 hours. Then Sunday morning happened. She was in her kitchen at 6:15 with her first cup of coffee, still in the oversized shirt she slept in, her hair loose and tangled, reviewing the week's order list for the bakery. She was not thinking about Caleb Morgan. She was thinking about whether she'd ordered enough vanilla bean for the Tuesday wholesale delivery, and whether the back refrigeration unit was making a new sound, or the same old sound she'd been ignoring for 3 months, and whether she could get away with repricing the almond croissants without losing Mrs. Calloway, who was her most loyal customer, and also the most vocal about the cost of things. She was deep in this completely practical assessment of her completely normal life when she heard very clearly from the other side of the hedge Sophie's voice saying, "Dad, you have to tell her," and Caleb's voice saying low and patient, "Sophie, I'm just saying. You're always just saying. Because you never do anything. You just think about it and then don't do it." A pause. "You don't know what I think about," Caleb said. "I know you stood at the hedge for 5 minutes on Tuesday and didn't knock." Hannah put her coffee cup down very carefully. "That was..." Caleb stopped. Started again. "I was checking the azalea situation." "The azalea situation," Sophie repeated with the flattest possible delivery from a 9-year-old. "The root encroachment issue." "Dad, go inside and eat your breakfast." "You like her." "Sophie, you've liked her for a really long time, and you keep pretending you don't, and I'm telling you as your daughter that it's getting embarrassing." The silence on the other side of the hedge lasted long enough that Hannah realized she had stopped breathing. "What's embarrassing?" Caleb said finally, with the careful quiet of a man choosing his words. is eavesdropping on other people's conversations. That's what got us into this in the first place, Sophie said cheerfully, and then footsteps the back door and silence. Hannah sat at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold in front of her, and stared at the hedge through her kitchen window and thought about a man standing at it for 5 minutes on a Tuesday. She did not know what to do with that information. She put it away very firmly and called the refrigeration repair service instead. The refrigeration repair service could not come until Thursday. She sat with the information about Tuesday and tried not to take it out and look at it again. She failed. By 9 o'clock Sunday morning, she had taken it out and looked at it approximately 40 times. By 9:15, she had decided with great finality to do absolutely nothing about it. She was a practical woman. She ran a business. She had survived an entire engagement party in a borrowed relationship and come out the other side with her dignity, more or less intact, and she was not going to complicate the straightforward geography of her life by reading too much into a 9-year-old's Sunday morning commentary. By 9:23, she was on her porch. She told herself she was checking her mail. She did not receive mail on Sundays. Caleb was on his porch steps with a cup of coffee and a legal pad on his knee, sketching something with the focused attention he brought to work problems. He looked up when she came out. He looked at her for a moment. She looked at him. "I wasn't eavesdropping," she said. He looked at her for another moment. "Okay." "I was in my kitchen. You two were—" She stopped. "It travels." "I know it travels." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I learned that the hard way recently." Hannah pressed her lips together to keep from laughing and failed. "Tuesday," she said. His expression went very still. "I wasn't—" He set the legal pad down. "The azalea roots are genuinely causing a property line issue." "Caleb." He looked at the street. "Caleb," she said again. Quieter. He picked up his coffee. "Yeah. I made cinnamon rolls," she said. "There are too many. I always make too many on Sunday." He looked at her. She looked back at him. "Sophie," he called without breaking eye contact with Hannah. From inside the house, "What?" "Miss Hannah made cinnamon rolls." The back door slammed with the enthusiasm of a child who had been waiting for exactly this development. And that was Sunday. Monday morning was coffee. Not planned, not announced. Hannah was leaving for the bakery at 6:45. Caleb was leaving for a job site at 7, and they met on the sidewalk between their houses because their schedules apparently had opinions. She handed him a paper cup from the bakery supply she kept in her car because she was a practical woman who needed caffeine in transit. He took it without comment. They walked to their respective cars. He said, "Good morning." She said, "Don't spill it, it's hot." He didn't spill it. The following morning, it happened again. By Wednesday, it was no longer accidental. She was not thinking about this. She was not cataloging mornings or drawing significance from them. She was a woman who made too much coffee in the mornings and had a neighbor who drank it. That was the complete totality of what was happening. By Thursday afternoon, Sophie was doing homework at Honey and Rye. This had technically happened once before 3 months ago, when Caleb had a late afternoon site meeting, and Sophie's after-school pickup fell in a gap. Hannah had offered without thinking, and Sophie had come and sat at the corner table with her backpack and done her math homework with focused, unhurried attention and eaten half of a slice of lemon pound cake and pronounced it mathematically perfect, which was not a useful piece of feedback but had made Hannah laugh until she had to hold on to the counter. Now Sophie appeared on Thursday at 3:40 with her backpack and a library book and looked at Hannah across the counter, and Hannah looked back, and no one mentioned Caleb's meeting because there wasn't one this Thursday, and the corner table simply became Sophie's table. Hannah did not examine this. She made hot chocolate with real milk, the way Sophie liked it, and went back to the afternoon prep work, and Sophie did her homework and occasionally read passages from her library book aloud when she encountered something she found notable. The book was about the history of lighthouses. Hannah learned more about lighthouse construction that Thursday afternoon than she had ever expected to know, and found to her surprise that she was interested in all of it. "Did you know," Sophie said without looking up from the book, "that the keeper has to live in the lighthouse? Like that's the whole job. You stay in the building you're responsible for." I did not know that, Hannah said. I think that's a good system, Sophie said. You're accountable. You can't just leave and say it's someone else's problem. Hannah was rolling croissant dough and said nothing. Dad's like that, Sophie added in the same conversational tone she used for Lighthouse Facts. About things he cares about, he stays. Hannah rolled the dough. Just a general observation, Sophie said, and turned a page. I noted it, Hannah said. Okay. The croissants came out excellent. At 5:30, Caleb came to pick Sophie up. He stood at the bakery counter while Sophie finished the last page of her chapter with the focused urgency of someone who needed to reach a stopping point, and Hannah handed him a coffee without being asked, and he took it with the ease of someone who had done this before, which he hadn't, or only once, or however many times the coffee handing had now happened, and he looked around the bakery with the particular attention he gave to spaces. The back room's giving you trouble, he said. Hannah looked at him. The angle on that doorframe. He nodded toward the back. It's been off since I first saw the place. Water damage to the lintel probably. The whole frame's shifted. I've been meaning to have someone look at it. I can look at it. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He said it the same way he'd said everything at the party. Not pressing. Just there. Hannah held his gaze for a moment. Saturday morning. Saturday morning. Sophie ready? She asked. Sophie was already at the door with her backpack on book under her arm, looking at them both with the expression of someone who had accomplished several things she'd set out to accomplish. They left. Hannah went back to closing the bakery, and she stood at the window and watched Caleb's truck pull away from the curb, and she thought about Sophie saying he stays, and about a man standing at a hedge on a Tuesday for 5 minutes, and about the way his hand had felt in hers. In her mother's garden, warm and steady, and completely unconcerned with convincing her of anything. She thought, I am in serious trouble. She thought, good. She thought, stop that immediately. She went home. Saturday came. Caleb showed up at 8 with a tool bag and a level and a thermos of coffee she hadn't asked him to bring, and he spent the morning in the bakery's back room, fixing the doorframe with the focused, unhurried competence of someone who understood what they were doing and didn't need to perform understanding. Hannah worked the counter through the morning rush, and occasionally she heard the sounds from the back room, the precise sounds of actual work. Nothing theatrical about them, and she felt something settle in her chest that she couldn't entirely name. Sophie came at 9 and immediately appointed herself official customer greeter, which turned out to be a role she was extraordinarily suited to. She had her father's stillness and her own particular warmth, and she stood at the end of the counter and said, "Good morning," to everyone who came in with such genuine focus that 3 separate customers asked Hannah if she was her daughter. Hannah said each time that she was a very good friend's daughter. Sophie each time said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. At 11:15, Caleb came out from the back room, set his tool bag down, and said, "Done." He washed his hands at the bakery sink. Reframed it properly. You shouldn't have any more trouble with that door. What do I owe you? Hannah asked. Nothing. Caleb, you've been feeding my daughter twice a week. He dried his hands on the towel she offered. We're well past even. Hannah looked at him. Saturday lunch, he said. It was simple. Everything with him was simple in this particular way, not uncomplicated at all, but direct. No performance, no angling. Just would you like to? The bakery closes at noon, she said. I know, I'll wait. He sat at Sophie's corner table with a cup of her coffee and his legal pad, and he sketched something that she couldn't see from the counter, and Sophie sat across from him and read her Lighthouse book, and the noon customers filtered out, and Hannah turned the sign to closed and locked the door and stood there for a moment with her hand on the lock, looking at the two of them at the corner table. She thought, this is the thing I invented Daniel to protect myself from. She thought, not the public part, not the party, not the relatives, this part, this ordinary, dangerous, specific part. Ready? Caleb asked, looking up. Yes, Hannah said. She was. She was also not ready at all. They walked to a diner 2 blocks over, because Sophie lobbied hard for breakfast food at noon a position. Hannah supported enthusiastically, and Caleb accepted with the composure of a man who had been outvoted and was fine with it. They ate eggs and toast, and Sophie ordered pancakes with the focused intention of someone who had planned this, and Hannah had the best cup of diner coffee she'd had in years. And at some point in the middle of discussing Sophie's lighthouse book, there were apparently many more interesting facts. She realized she was laughing in the specific way that she forgot to be careful about. Caleb noticed. She knew he noticed because of the thing that happened at the corner of his eyes, the slight ease that moved through him when she laughed that way, like something in him relaxed when it happened. She looked at her coffee. Sophie was explaining the mechanics of a Fresnel lens with great authority. It was a lunch. It was also something considerably more than a lunch, and all three of them knew it, and none of them said so, and that was its own kind of honesty. The weeks arranged themselves this way. Sophie at the bakery on Thursdays. Coffee on weekday mornings. Caleb helping with the back room, and then the awning that had been pulling away from the facade, and then the rear entrance lock that had been stiff since fall. Hannah sending food home with Sophie on days when she knew Caleb was working late, not announced, just handed over at closing time in a paper bag that Sophie accepted with perfect dignity, as though receiving it were simply the natural order of things, which increasingly it was. And beneath the ordinary accumulation of it, beneath the coffee, and the Thursdays, and the Saturday lunches, and the things Caleb fixed without being asked to fix, there was something building. Something that neither of them named because naming it would require acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would require deciding what to do about it, and deciding what to do about it would require facing the things that sat below the surface of both of them, like load-bearing structures nobody had assessed yet. Hannah knew what sat below her surface. She had known for years. It had a shape and a history, and the specific face of Ryan Mercer saying, "I just think it would be better if," and the accumulated weight of every room she'd walked into already calculating whether she belonged there. She did not know what sat below Caleb's surface. Not completely. She had pieces of it. Sophie's careful occasional references to before, which meant before Claire died, and which Sophie navigated with the precision of someone who loved a parent and understood his limits. The way Caleb sometimes stopped in the middle of something and went quiet in a particular way. Not sad, not absent, just somewhere else for a moment before coming back. The fact that he had in 18 months of living next door been pleasant and helpful and present with everyone on Forsyth Street, and had dated nobody, and had given no indication of interest in dating anybody, until a toolbox fell over on a Friday evening. She asked Sophie about it once indirectly on a Thursday afternoon in October when they were alone at the bakery, and Sophie had finished her homework and was helping Hannah fill pastry bags with lemon curd, which she was extremely serious about doing correctly. "Sophie," Hannah said, "does your dad ever talk about the future like what he wants?" Sophie was quiet for a moment, concentrating on the pastry bag. "He talks about houses. The ones he wants to design. He has sketches." "That's not—" "I know it's not what you mean." Sophie looked up. "He doesn't talk about the other kind of future, not out loud." She went back to the pastry bag. "But he thinks about it. I can tell when he's thinking about it because he gets very quiet, and then he does something productive like fixing something." Hannah absorbed this. "There's been a lot of fixing lately," Sophie added in an extremely neutral tone. Hannah concentrated on her pastry bag. "He's scared," Sophie said, very simply. "Not of you, not specifically. He's scared of—" She thought about it. "Of something going wrong again. Something being taken away. He had that happen once, and he built everything very small after it, so nothing could get big enough to hurt that much again." Hannah looked at Sophie. Sophie met her eyes. She was 9 years old, and she had the steady, clear gaze of someone who had worked out difficult things and was not pretending she hadn't. "I think he's getting less scared," Sophie said. "But I also think someone's going to have to be patient with him. Not the whole time, just through the part where he understands that being happy again isn't betraying anyone." The bakery was quiet. Late afternoon, the last customers gone, the easy sound of a Thursday winding down. "You're 9, Hannah said. "I know. You shouldn't have to think about this stuff." "I've been thinking about it for 4 years, Sophie said. "I've had time." She handed Hannah the pastry bag. "Miss Hannah, do you like him?" Hannah took the pastry bag. She considered the considerable number of ways she could answer that question, and the relative honesty of each. And she looked at Sophie Morgan across the honey and rye counter and thought about a green dress and a party, and a man who had shown up in a jacket without being asked, and a Tuesday that she thought about far more often than was strategically advisable. "Yes," she said. "I like him." Sophie nodded. "Okay," she said with the satisfied finality of someone crossing an item off a list. "Good. Then, he likes you too, in case you were wondering." "I wasn't going to ask." "I know. That's why I told you." She went back to the lemon curd. And that Hannah thought was the problem. It wasn't that she didn't know. It was that she did know, and knowing wasn't the same as being safe, and being safe was the thing she'd spent 4 years no longer than that much longer than that being careful about. She had learned to be careful in small increments, starting with Ryan and going back further than that, back to the first time someone she loved had made her feel like herself was something that needed apologizing for. She wasn't willing to let herself want something at full volume, and then have it look at her the way Ryan had looked at her. The kind way, the concerned way, the way that said, "I care about you, and also, you are not quite right as you are." She could not survive Caleb looking at her that way, which was the real problem, because she was starting to believe he wouldn't. And believing that was the most dangerous thing she'd felt in years. The community fundraiser at Honey and Rye happened on a Thursday evening, which meant Sophie was already there when people began arriving, and she transitioned from homework to helping stack chairs with the easy comfort of someone who considered the bakery a second home, which she increasingly did, and which Hannah had stopped trying to pretend she minded. The event was a neighborhood literacy initiative. Local businesses donated a portion of that evening's proceeds, and the organizer, a retired teacher named Marvine, who had the organizational energy of a small army, had been planning it for 2 months. Hannah had donated the baked goods outright and offered the space. Caleb had come after work still in his site clothes and taken up a position near the coffee station, with the unobtrusive helpfulness of someone who had decided to be useful without being asked. Ryan arrived at 7:15. Hannah hadn't known he would be there. She found out later that Ryan was dating someone in the neighborhood who had organized one of the donation tables, which explained his presence at a Forsyth Street community event, and also created the specific particular awkwardness of an ex-boyfriend appearing in a space that had become quietly entirely hers. She managed Ryan's arrival with composure. Brief acknowledgement. Professional warmth. Redirect to the dessert table. She was a business owner who dealt with difficult customers with equanimity. She could manage 30 seconds of ex-boyfriend at a fundraiser. Then Ryan saw Caleb. And something happened in Ryan's expression, a recalculation followed by the particular type of social carelessness that well-dressed men sometimes mistook for wit. I was standing with a small group near the coffee station, and he said it while looking at Caleb but loudly enough that Hannah at the counter heard every word. "Must be a certain kind of guy," Ryan said, with the comfortable ease of a man performing for an audience, "who makes it his hobby to rescue women who need a hand up. Some people just have that complex." The group laughed. Small, uncertain social laugh. The kind people made when they weren't sure something was funny, but didn't want to be the one who questioned it. Hannah went very still behind the counter. She did not look at Caleb. She heard Caleb set his coffee down. She heard him move. "What was that?" Caleb's voice was quiet. Specific kind of quiet. The kind that wasn't gentle. Ryan turned with the smile of someone who was accustomed to the social authority of his kind of handsome and his kind of easy. "Just making conversation, man." "About Hannah?" "About..." Ryan shrugged. "Just an observation." "About Hannah," Caleb said again. Same voice, same quiet. Hannah came around the counter. She crossed the bakery floor to where the 2 men were standing, and she put her hand on Caleb's arm, and she said, "Caleb." He turned to look at her. His jaw was set in this way she'd seen once before at the party, when Ryan had said she'd come into herself the particular stillness of a man who was holding something in through a decision of will. "Don't," she said. "Hannah. I mean it." Her voice was low, even. "Don't defend me." His expression changed. Not backed down, that wasn't it. He just looked at her, and something in him heard the specific quality of what she'd said, and he waited. She looked at Ryan. Ryan was watching them both with the expression of someone who had misjudged the room and was starting to understand it. "Ryan," Hannah said, "you should go enjoy the event." He went. She stood there for a moment. Caleb was still beside her still holding that particular stillness. "Outside," she said. She pushed open the bakery's front door and went out onto the sidewalk, and Caleb followed, and she turned to face him in the cool October evening and said what had been building in her throat since the moment she'd heard Ryan's voice carry across her bakery. "Don't defend me because you feel sorry for me." Caleb went still. "What? I have spent—" Her voice cracked once and then steadied. "I have spent years being either mocked or pitied or celebrated because someone found me worth their time, and I will not be someone's project, someone's cause. I'm not interested in being rescued." "I wasn't—" "You showed up in a jacket," she said, "to my mother's engagement party, because you heard me say something pathetic through a hedge and you felt bad, and that's not why I came." His voice was quiet, direct, not defensive. "Then why—" He looked at her. The October street was quiet around them, the fundraiser noise muffled behind the bakery door. "Because I wanted to," he said. "That's not an answer." "Hannah, it's the only answer there is." He took one step toward her, not closing distance aggressively, just moving into the conversation. "You think I came to that party because I felt sorry for you?" She didn't answer. "I've lived next door to you for a year and a half," he said. "I've watched you run a business by yourself from the ground. I've watched you take care of everyone on this street without asking for anything back. I've watched you be every single thing you are." His voice didn't rise. It went quieter. "And not once did I think you needed my help." "Then what were you doing on Tuesday?" she said. "At the hedge." He went very still. "Sophie told me," she said. "Not directly, but I figured it out." A silence. "I was trying to decide something," he said finally. "What?" He was quiet long enough that she felt it in her chest, the specific weight of someone choosing their words with care. "Whether I was willing to risk—" He stopped, started again. "Whether I had the right to ask for something when I wasn't sure I was ready to give what asking would require." Hannah looked at him. "Caleb." She said it carefully. "Tell me honestly, right now, if Sophie weren't in the equation, if she hadn't been on that porch, if she hadn't come to the party, if she weren't in the back of that bakery right now, would you be standing here?" She watched his face. He didn't look away, but he didn't answer immediately. And in the space of that not immediate answer, something in Hannah's chest that had been very carefully suspended came loose and dropped. "I need you to answer that," she said. "I know." His voice was strained in a way she hadn't heard before. "I'm trying to be honest." "So be honest." He exhaled. "Sophie is part of every decision I make. She's been part of every decision for 4 years. I can't separate." "I'm not asking you to separate anything." Hannah's voice was steady, and she was proud of that. "I'm asking you whether I'm real to you, or whether I'm a solution to something. Because if I'm a solution—" She stopped, gathered. "I've been a solution before. I know what that feels like, and I cannot do it again." He looked at her. His jaw worked. He said nothing. She waited. The bakery door opened briefly behind them, the sound of the fundraiser spilling out, and then closed again. Someone had noticed them and left them alone. Probably Marvine. Possibly Sophie. Caleb said very quietly, "No." "No what?" "You're not a solution." He looked at the sidewalk, then back at her. "You're the most specific, particular thing I've felt in 4 years, and that terrifies me, and I handled it badly just now, and I'm sorry." Hannah absorbed that. She held it. She turned and walked back inside before she could respond with the thing that was sitting in her throat, which was something she was not ready to say on a sidewalk outside her own bakery, in the middle of a community fundraiser. Caleb stood outside for a moment. Then he followed her in. Sophie looked up from the corner table where she had been very studiously not watching them through the front window. "How'd that go?" she asked. "Eat your cake," Caleb said. "It went fine," Hannah said at the same time. Sophie looked between them. Medium, she concluded. She went back to her cake. And the fundraiser continued, and the evening continued, and neither Caleb nor Hannah said anything else about the sidewalk that night. But something had changed. Something had been said that couldn't be unsaid, and acknowledged that couldn't be unacknowledged, and it sat between them for the rest of the evening, like a question that hadn't been answered yet. At the end of the night, when the last guests left, and Sophie was helping stack chairs, and Caleb was moving tables back into position, Hannah looked at him across the bakery and thought he said terrifying. He said, "You are the most specific thing I have felt in 4 years, and it terrifies me." That was not the language of pity. That was the language of someone who was scared of the same thing she was scared of. And she didn't know yet whether that made it better or worse. She suspected both. She suspected it was exactly both. The thing about almost something is that it has a weight. Not the weight of grief, not the weight of loss, but the specific particular weight of a thing that exists and has been seen and has not yet been resolved. Hannah carried it through the following week, the way you carry a stone in your pocket, aware of it, constantly adjusting your gait, without meaning to, reaching for it in unguarded moments, and then deliberately setting it down. She did not reach out first. She told herself this was practical. They still lived next door to each other. Sophie still came to the bakery on Thursdays. Caleb still appeared on the sidewalk at 6:40 in the morning, with the timing of someone who was either very punctual or paying attention, and she still handed him coffee, and he still said thank you. And the ordinary mechanics of their proximity continued without interruption. But the thing that had been said on the sidewalk, that most specific particular sentence spoken quietly in the October cool, was there in every coffee handoff and every good morning and every moment when their eyes held for exactly 1 second longer than necessary before one of them looked away. She was not avoiding him. She was simply not moving toward him either. By Wednesday, she had convinced herself this was fine. By Thursday morning, when she unlocked this bakery and stood in the quiet of the early prep hour and thought about the way he'd said, "terrifies me," she was slightly less convinced. By Thursday afternoon, when Sophie arrived and sat at the corner table and didn't say a word about any of it, which meant Sophie was being strategic, which was somehow worse than if she'd said something directly. Hannah accepted that fine was not precisely the operative word. "Sophie," she said, setting down a cup of hot chocolate. Sophie looked up from her homework. "Yeah." "You're very quiet today." "I'm doing homework." "You're always doing homework. You're also always talking." Sophie put down her pen with the deliberate patience of a 9-year-old who had decided to let an adult arrive at something in their own time. "I'm giving you space." Hannah looked at her. "Why?" "Because Dad said to." A pause. "He said to give me space," Hannah said. "He said to give you both space." Sophie picked up her pencil again. "He's giving himself space too. He's been very productively fixing things. He fixed the garage door Tuesday. He fixed the kitchen faucet Wednesday. This morning he reorganized his entire blueprint filing system, which he has not touched in 3 years. Hannah absorbed this. "He fixes things when he's thinking," Sophie added helpfully. "I know," Hannah said. "He's thought enough to fix basically everything in the house." Hannah went back to the counter and did not respond to this, but she stood at the counter for a long moment, doing nothing in particular, before she remembered what she had been doing and resumed doing it. And Sophie returned to her homework with the satisfied expression of someone who had planted seeds and was prepared to wait for them. The following morning, Caleb was not on the sidewalk at 6. Satisfied expression of someone who had planted seeds and was prepared to wait for them. The following morning, Caleb was not on the sidewalk at 6:40. Hannah stood at her car with her keys and a travel cup for approximately 45 seconds, which was long enough to register his absence, and short enough that she would not admit later how much she had registered it. She got in the car. She drove to the bakery. She opened up and started the morning prep, and told herself it was a Friday, and he had a different schedule on Fridays, and there was nothing meaningful to read into the absence of a man who had not committed to being on a sidewalk in the first place. Her phone buzzed at 7:15. A text. "Caleb. Early site meeting. Sorry." 2 words. 2 words with a period and an apology. She read it 3 times. Then she typed back, "No problem." Then she looked at those two words for a moment and added, "Hope the meeting goes well." Then she looked at that and thought it was too much and considered deleting it and sent it instead. He replied with a thumbs up emoji, which meant he was driving. She put the phone away and made croissants with perhaps slightly more force than the dough technically required. By Saturday afternoon, she had made a decision. Not a grand one. Not a dramatic one. She was not, despite what certain rom-coms suggested, going to show up on a man's porch with a speech prepared. She was 31 years old, and she owned a business, and she had been through enough emotional territory to know that the things she kept doing, the careful management of distance, the preemptive retreat, the calculation of rejection, probability before risk had even been attempted, was exactly what she had accused Ryan of from the other direction. She had accused Ryan of wanting her to change. But she had been changing herself for years quietly, strategically making herself smaller in rooms before anyone asked her to, apologizing for space she hadn't taken yet. She recognized what she was doing. She recognized it, and she chose that Saturday afternoon with the deliberate practicality of a woman who had built something real out of hard work and a rented commercial kitchen to stop. She put on her coat. She walked out her front door. She went next door and knocked. Caleb answered in a paint-stained shirt. He was holding a screwdriver. She looked at the screwdriver. "What are you fixing?" "Light switch a plate in the hallway." "Is that necessary? It's been slightly crooked for 2 years." "Caleb." He looked at her. She looked back. "I've been thinking," she said. "I have too. Can I come in?" He stepped back from the door. She went in. Sophie was at the kitchen table with the book, and she looked up, and her expression did the thing where it went very neutral, very quickly, which was her version of not reacting. "Hi, Miss Hannah." "Hi, Sophie." Hannah looked at her. "Could you maybe—" "I'll be in my room," Sophie said, and was gone with the book in approximately 6 seconds, which was so fast it was almost insulting in how prepared she'd been for exactly this moment. Caleb set the screwdriver on the hallway table. He looked at Hannah. "You said terrifying," she said. "I did. I want to understand what you meant." She held his gaze. "Not what I think you meant. What you actually meant." He leaned against the hallway wall. He crossed his arms, not defensive, the posture of someone gathering himself. "I was married," he said, "for 8 years, and Claire was—" He stopped. "She was good. She was a good person, and she loved Sophie, and she loved me, and then she was gone. No warning. Brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning. Sophie was 5. He said it the way you say things you have said many times in your head, but rarely out loud, flat, precise, carrying enormous weight in the flatness. And after that, I built everything small. Not consciously. Just—" He looked at the hallway table. "If nothing is big, nothing can fall that far." Hannah was quiet. "You're not small," he said. "The way I feel about you is not small. And that—" His jaw tightened. "That scared me in a way I hadn't felt since before Claire died, and I handled it by standing at a hedge for 5 minutes on a Tuesday instead of knocking." "Sophie told me about the hedge." "I know. Sophie tells you everything." "She's on our side," Hannah said. Something in Caleb's face shifted at our side. Something careful and guarded moved a fraction of an inch in the direction of something else. "What are you scared of?" he asked. Specifically. She had known this question was coming. She had been preparing for it since she walked over. "I'm scared," she said, "that I'll let this become real, and then you'll see me, the actual daily version of me, not the party version, or the across-the-hedge version, and something will happen. Some shift. And you'll be kind about it. You'll be so kind about it. And I cannot—" Her voice held. She made it hold. "I cannot survive someone being kind about it again." "Ryan," he said. "Ryan, my mother. Every person who ever looked at me with that particular combination of affection and concern." She met his eyes. "Loving someone shouldn't feel like waiting for a sentence that starts with 'I care about you, but—'" Caleb was very still. "I know I'm not—" She stopped. "I know what I look like. I know what the world thinks about what I look like. I have been told in every possible gentle variation that I would be better received if I were different. And I spent years believing it. And then I stopped believing it, but stopping believing it didn't stop me from waiting for the moment someone I trusted would confirm it. I'm not going to say that to you, Caleb said. You don't know that. I do know that, Caleb. She said it with patience. With the patience of someone who has been disappointed before in a very specific way. You cannot promise me something about the future. I'm not promising you the future. He pushed off the wall. He was standing closer now. I'm telling you who I am right now. I'm telling you that for 18 months I have been watching you be exactly yourself, the whole version, the daily version, the version that argues with the refrigeration repair company for 30 minutes and wins and leaves bread on porches and laughs too loud and doesn't apologize for it. He stopped. I've been watching you be yourself, and I have not once wanted you to be different. And that's not kindness. That's just you. That's just who you are. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere upstairs, Sophie was very possibly not reading her book. I need to tell you something, Hannah said. Okay. When I was on the phone, that Friday. She watched his face. You said you heard me say I was tired of walking into rooms apologizing for taking up space. I heard it. I didn't say it. A beat. A very specific beat. I was thinking it, she said. I was thinking it, and I didn't say it out loud. I'd thought it before plenty of times, but I'd never actually... She stopped. How did you know? The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. I didn't hear you say it on the phone, Caleb said slowly. He looked at her steadily. I knew it because I recognized it. I recognized the shape of it. From myself. He paused. I've been walking into rooms smaller than I need to be for 4 years. Ever since Claire. Making myself careful. Making everything careful. So nothing could get big enough to matter enough to break me again. Hannah stared at him. I didn't hear you say it, he said. I knew it because I live it. That was the thing that moved through her. Then, not a slow understanding, but a sudden total one, the kind that rearranges furniture in your chest without asking permission. She had thought all this time that Caleb was steady in the uncomplicated way of someone who had not been broken. But steady and unbroken were not the same thing. He was steady the way a building was steady after structural repair, not because nothing had happened, but because someone had done the work. He had been doing the work, quietly, alone, for 4 years. Caleb, she said. And then she didn't say anything else because she didn't have words for the specific shape of what she felt, and she was practical enough to know that performing an emotion she couldn't articulate was worse than silence. He looked at her. She looked back. Okay, she said. Okay what? Okay, she said again, as though that covered it. As though one word was sufficient for the decision she had just made. The deliberate, practical, terrifying decision to stop managing distance and let something be what it was. He studied her face. Then he said, Are you sure? And that was the thing that simple 2-word question offered without pressure, without certainty about her answer. That was the moment she understood the difference between what she had been given before and what was being offered now. Ryan would have been sure for her. Ryan would have supplied the certainty she lacked. Caleb simply asked. No, she said honestly. But I'm done being careful. He nodded. He reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, not with the weight of declaration. Just took it the way you take a hand when you're walking somewhere and you don't want to walk alone. Her fingers closed around his. Sophie, he called without looking away from Hannah. From upstairs. Yeah, immediate. Not even a pretense of not listening. You can come down now. The sound of feet on stairs at a pace that suggested Sophie had been at the top of them for some time. She appeared at the hallway entrance, looked at their joined hands, looked at their faces and said, Finally. In a tone of such profound relief and vindication that Hannah laughed, the real one, the loud, undignified, honest one. And that was the sound that was still in the air when everything changed. Because that was the Monday. And the Monday after that was when Margaret called. And the Monday after that was when everything that had been building quietly in the ordinary warmth of coffee and Thursdays and hand-holding in hallways was suddenly no longer quiet. Margaret Brooks did not telephone her daughter at 9 in the morning on a Monday for pleasant conversation. Hannah knew this. She knew the specific quality of a Monday morning call from her mother, the same way she knew the specific quality of the refrigeration unit's bad sound familiar, predictable in its weight, something to be managed. She answered while measuring flour. "I heard something," Margaret said without preamble. "Good morning, Mom." "Don't good morning me, Hannah. I heard something, and I need to know if it's true." Hannah set down the measuring cup. "What did you hear?" Patricia ran into Dorothy at the Forsyth Park Farmers Market Saturday. A pause. "Dorothy told her that the man you brought to the party, Caleb, was not Daniel." The flour measuring cup sat on the counter. The bakery was quiet. "Mom," Dorothy said, "he's your next-door neighbor. She said they had a long conversation about it at the dessert table." Dorothy said, and I am quoting, that she knew, because she has outlived 2 husbands and can tell the difference between a man who's been in love with a woman for a while and a man performing at a party. Hannah closed her eyes. "Was Daniel ever real?" Margaret asked. Her voice had the quality of a woman who already knew the answer and was offering her daughter the opportunity to say it herself. Hannah opened her eyes. "No," she said. The silence on the phone had weight. "Hannah Louise Brooks." "I know. You invented an entire man." "I know, Mom. For 8 months." "I know. And you brought your neighbor." "I know what I did." Hannah's voice was steady. She made it steady. "Mom, I need you to let me explain." "I'm listening." Margaret's voice had shifted. Not to anger, to something more careful, more controlled, which was sometimes worse than anger. "I invented Daniel because I was tired," Hannah said. "I was tired of the question, the same question every family event in every possible variation. Why aren't you seeing anyone? Are you putting yourself out there? You know men are attracted to confidence. You know if you just—" She stopped. "I was tired of walking into rooms where the first thing everyone wanted to know was why I was still alone. So I invented a reason I wasn't." "Hannah." Her mother's voice had changed again. "And I brought Caleb to the party because he offered, because he's a good man, and he was trying to help, and I let him because I was too far into a lie to get out of it gracefully. And then—" She paused. "And then something happened that wasn't the plan." "What happened?" "I found out he wasn't pretending." She said it quietly. "And I wasn't either." A long silence on the phone, longer than Margaret's silences usually ran. "Mom," Hannah said, "I need you to hear something. And I need you to actually hear it, not catalog it and worry about it later. I'm hearing you." "The reason I invented Daniel," Hannah said, "is because I have spent most of my adult life feeling like being single was evidence of something wrong with me. Not just socially, personally, like it was a verdict." She pressed on before Margaret could interrupt. "And some of that is from the world. And some of it is from family dinners where everyone looks at me with that face and asks that question and means, well, entirely means well, and it lands the same way every time." Her voice held. "I don't need you to tell me someone will love me. I needed you to believe sometime before that happened that I was already enough." The silence stretched. "Hannah," Margaret said, very quietly, "I'm not saying this to hurt you." "I know you're not." A pause. "I know. I just needed to say it." What followed was the kind of conversation that couldn't have happened 8 months earlier, before the party, before the hedge, before any of it. Margaret talked about her own mother, who had measured love in terms of presentation, in terms of what the neighbors thought, and how that measuring had become Margaret's language without her ever choosing it as her language. She didn't excuse it. She explained it, which was different and smaller and more honest. She apologized. Not the sweeping kind of apology that resolves everything in a single generous gesture. The small, specific kind. "I didn't know how it was landing. I should have asked. I love you the way you are, and I don't think I ever made that simple enough." Hannah sat on the bakery floor because her legs were tired. her back against the prep counter, flower on her sleeve, and she accepted the apology the same way it was given, specifically, imperfectly, honestly. "Tell me about Caleb," her mother said, when they had both breathed for a moment. "He's my neighbor," Hannah said. "Dorothy said he's been in love with you for a while." Dorothy is 81 and has very strong opinions. Dorothy is also usually right. Hannah looked at the flower on her sleeve. "He held my hand in the hallway on Saturday." A pause. "Just the hand, Mom. I'm asking, just the hand. He's careful. About things. He lost his wife 4 years ago and he's been—" She thought about what Sophie had said, what Caleb had said in the hallway, about building everything small. He's been making his life small so it couldn't get broken again. And so have I, in a different way. And I think we've both decided to stop. "Do you love him?" her mother asked, direct as a foundation beam. Hannah sat on the bakery floor and thought about coffee on sidewalks and a dark jacket on a Saturday afternoon, and the particular steadiness of a man who fixed things because he was thinking, and whose daughter had brought them both pieces of chocolate cake in a garden in July. "I think so," she said. "Hannah, do you love him?" She leaned her head back against the prep counter and looked at the bakery ceiling. "Yes," she said. "I love him." The word sat in the air of her empty bakery at 9:20 on a Monday morning, and it was the most honest thing she had said in years. "Good," Margaret said. "Then stop wasting time." Hannah laughed. Short, startled reel. "Invite him to Sunday dinner," her mother said. "Not as a performance, as himself." "Okay. And Sophie." "Okay, Mom. And Hannah." Her mother's voice was warm and slightly rough in a way it didn't usually get. "I'm sorry it took me this long to ask the right questions." Hannah pressed her hand to her eyes for a moment. "Me too," she said. She went back to measuring flour. She measured it twice before she realized she'd lost count. The week that followed moved with the particular intensity of weeks in which something has been decided and is now being lived into. She told Caleb about the phone call. Not all of it, the parts that were hers, the things she'd said about the years of questions, the apology her mother had given. He listened without filling the silence, which was one of the things she had catalogued about him, without meaning to catalog anything the way he listened. "Like what you were saying mattered enough to receive carefully. She asked me to invite you to Sunday dinner," Hannah said. "As what?" he asked. "As yourself." He looked at her. "Just you," she said. "And Sophie. As whatever this is." "What is this?" he asked. Quiet. Not challenging. Genuinely asking the way he genuinely asked things. She looked at him across the bakery counter where he had come on a Tuesday morning in the middle of a slow hour. No particular reason, no pretense of one. And she thought, this is the most natural thing that has happened to me in years. "This is real," she said. He nodded. "Okay," he said. Sophie's Sunday dinner debut at Margaret Brooks's table was by any measure an event. Sophie wore the blue dress again. She brought her Lighthouse book because she had decided Margaret would find it interesting, a judgment that proved precisely correct. Margaret and Sophie spent 45 minutes in the garden before dinner discussing lighthouse architecture, while Caleb helped set the table, and Hannah's Aunt Patricia, who had been invited because Margaret ran a thorough operation, circled Caleb with the systematic attention of a structural inspector. "Second time meeting you," Patricia said, positioning herself at the table's corner. "Yes, ma'am." "Last time was the engagement party." "It was." "You were there as—" She paused. "As a favor." "I was there," Caleb said, "because I wanted to be." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. "That's not what I heard." "I know what you heard." His voice was even. "I heard it too later, and my answer is the same." Across the table. Hannah was pouring water and watching this exchange with the expression of someone prepared to intervene, and increasingly certain she didn't need to. Patricia put her elbows on the table, which was something she never did in Margaret's house, because Margaret considered it a sign of poor breeding, and looked at Caleb directly. "What are your intentions?" "Patricia," Margaret said from the kitchen doorway. "I'm asking," Patricia said. Caleb looked at her steadily. "I intend to show up," he said. "Consistently and honestly, and without asking Hannah to be anyone other than who she is." Patricia absorbed this. "That's a good answer," she said. "It's the only one I have." "It's a good one." She unfolded her napkin. "Your daughter is remarkable." "I know. She told me that a lighthouse keeper lives in the building they're responsible for." Patricia looked at Margaret, who had come in from the kitchen. "Margaret, did you know that—" "Sophie mentioned it," Margaret said, setting down a dish. "I think it's a good system," Patricia said. "Accountability." Caleb looked at Hannah. Hannah looked back at him, and they both remembered, without saying it, that Sophie had said the same thing to Hannah in the bakery 2 months ago over lemon curd, and neither of them needed to say that they remembered, because they were two people who had been paying close attention to the same small 9-year-old person for long enough that certain things simply existed between them as shared history. Dinner was loud and warm, and full of the particular noise of a family that loved each other in complicated and well-practiced ways. Margaret asked Caleb about his work, and listened with genuine interest, and asked follow-up questions that showed she had retained the initial answers. Sophie and Patricia developed what could only be described as a partnership of equal intensity and mutual respect. Hannah ate food her mother had made without calculating anything, without managing anything, without preparing any part of herself for a verdict that never came. After dinner, while Patricia and Sophie continued their conversation in the living room, and Caleb and Margaret were washing dishes in the kitchen with the easy teamwork of two people who were both naturally practical. Hannah stood in the hallway and looked at the photographs on the wall. There were photographs of Vanessa, photographs of Hannah, school pictures, holiday pictures, a formal portrait from when they were teenagers. In every photograph of Hannah, she was smiling with that particular smile, the careful one, the assembled one. In one photograph from a Christmas when she was maybe 11, the smile was different, unguarded, the real laugh. She looked at that photograph for a moment. She heard Caleb's voice from the kitchen, low and easy, saying something that made her mother laugh. She thought about what she'd said to her mother on the phone. "I was tired of walking into rooms already apologizing for taking up space." She was standing in her mother's hallway. She was not apologizing. It was not a dramatic moment. There were no violins, and no revelations, and nothing cinematic about it. It was just a woman standing in a hallway, looking at a photograph, understanding something she had already understood intellectually for years, but was only now understanding in the place where things actually land. She was enough. She had always been enough. She had simply spent a very long time waiting for someone else to confirm it, when confirmation was never going to come from outside her, because it wasn't an outside question. The dishes clinked in the kitchen. Sophie laughed at something Patricia said. Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. "You okay?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She turned from the photograph. "I was just—" She looked at the image of 11-year-old Hannah with the real laugh. Looking. He came to stand beside her. He looked at the photograph. "That one," he said, "looks like Saturday lunch." She looked at him. "The laugh," he said simply. Hannah looked at the photograph, then back at him. "Caleb," she said very quietly. "Yeah. I love you." She said it because she had promised herself she was done being careful, and because her mother had said, "Stop wasting time," and because she was 31 years old, and she had built a business from nothing and survived every room she'd ever walked into, and she could say the true thing without managing the aftermath in advance. He looked at her. His jaw moved once. "I know," he said, quiet and certain and without performance. Then, "I love you too." No violins, no cinematic pause. Just two people in a hallway in a house in Savannah saying the true thing out loud and meaning it and standing in the space of it without apologizing. From the kitchen, Margaret's voice. "Hannah, do you want tea?" "Yes, please," Hannah called back. Caleb took her hand. They walked back toward the kitchen together. And the evening continued warm and ordinary and full, and neither of them let go. They said "I love you" in a hallway on a Sunday evening, and the world did not rearrange itself to accommodate the declaration. This was, Hannah decided, the correct way for it to happen. Monday came. She opened the bakery at 6:30. The refrigeration unit made it sound. A wholesale order came in wrong, and she spent 40 minutes on the phone with the supplier working through the discrepancy with the focused patience of a woman who had done this before and would do it again. Caleb texted at 7:08. "Good morning." She replied, "Morning." The supplier issue resolved by 8. She made croissants. A regular came in and told her the lemon pound cake had gotten better. She said thank you and meant it. Life continued in this way that life does when something important has been said, not transformed, not elevated to some other register, just continued with the addition of one true thing in the inventory of known things. That was November. By December, the thing that was real was visibly, undeniably, specifically real. Caleb drove Sophie to school in the mornings. Hannah drove past the school on her way to the bakery, and sometimes she saw his truck pulling out from the drop-off, and they waved at each other through windshields like two people who had graduated past the need to perform anything for each other, which was its own kind of intimacy. Sophie's school had a mother-daughter holiday event in the second week of December. Hannah found out about it on a Thursday from Sophie, who mentioned it with the particular casualness of someone who had thought carefully about how to bring something up and decided that making it sound incidental was the best approach. "There's this thing at school," Sophie said, not looking up from her homework. "Second Friday of December. Kind of a brunch thing, for moms and daughters." Hannah was organizing the pastry case and did not look up either. "Sounds nice." "Yeah." A pause. "Dad said he'd come, but it's specifically for moms, so..." Another pause. "He said I could skip it." Hannah looked up. Sophie was still looking at her homework. Her pencil was moving, but not in a way that suggested she was actually writing anything. "Sophie," Hannah said. "Yeah." "Would you want me to come?" The pencil stopped. Sophie looked up. Her face was doing the thing where she was very carefully not reacting. "You don't have to. I didn't ask if I had to. I asked if you'd want me to." A beat, longer than Sophie's beats usually ran. "Yes," she said. Simply. "I'd want that." Hannah nodded. "Then I'll come." Sophie looked back down at her homework. The pencil resumed moving. After a moment, "You'll have to fill out a form saying you're a guardian or a family friend or something." "Okay." "Dad can get you the form." "Okay." "He'll probably make a big deal about it being too much to ask." "I'll handle your father." Sophie smiled at her homework. Not a small smile, a real one that she didn't try to contain. Hannah went back to the pastry case. She was aware somewhere in the middle of her chest of the specific weight of what she'd just agreed to. Not the event itself, but what the event meant. A mother-daughter brunch. A form that said family friend. A 9-year-old who had been without her mother for 4 years, and had chosen carefully and deliberately to offer this particular thing to a woman who was not her mother and would never claim to be. Hannah handled the pastry case with great focus for approximately 3 minutes before she had to go into the back room and stand there for a moment by herself. She was fine. She was completely fine. She came back out and handed a piece of lemon pound cake, and Sophie said, "Mathematically perfect." Exactly as she'd said it the first time, and Hannah laughed, and that was Thursday. She told Caleb that evening on his porch, in the specific way she had of telling him things that were too large for text, directly looking at him without managing her expression. He was quiet for a long moment after she said it. Hannah, he said. "It was her idea." "I know it was her idea." His voice was rough at the edges. "I know exactly whose idea that was." "Are you okay with it?" He looked out at the street. His jaw was tight in the way it got when something had moved him past the place where he could be easy about it. "My daughter chose you," he said, very quietly. "Caleb. She didn't do it for me. She didn't do it because I asked her to. She chose." He turned to look at Hannah. "She's been the most careful person I know since her mother died. She doesn't give that kind of thing easily." "I know," Hannah said. "You know what that means." "I think so. She trusts you." He said it like a fact he was still absorbing. She trusts you the way she trusted Claire." The porch was quiet around them. December cold, settling into the savannah evening, in the particular way it did not brutal, but present enough to feel. "Is that okay?" Hannah asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. And the single word carried the weight of 4 years of careful small living and the deliberate decision to stop. "It's more than okay." He reached for her hand. She gave it to him. They sat on his porch in the December evening, and neither of them said anything else, because the thing that had been said was large enough to sit in without needing additional language. The brunch was on a Friday morning. Hannah wore the green dress again. Not because she'd planned it, she'd opened her closet and seen it, and thought for the first time since the engagement party that it was just a dress she liked. Not a piece of armor. Not a performance. Just a dress. She picked Sophie up at 7:30, because the event started at 8, and Sophie had specific opinions about arriving early enough to get a good table. Sophie was wearing the blue dress and carrying her lighthouse book, which she explained was not for reading, but for showing Ms. Patterson, who taught science and had expressed interest in lighthouse mechanics during a class discussion. "You carry that book everywhere," Hannah said, pulling out of the driveway. "It's useful," Sophie said. "It's your security object." Sophie considered this. "It's both," she allowed. They got a good table. Near the window, which was Sophie's preference. The event was cheerful and loud in the way school events are organized. Chaos with good intentions, and Hannah spent the morning drinking mediocre coffee and eating pastries that were fine but not as good as hers, which she did not say out loud, and watching Sophie navigate the social geography of her 4th grade class with the composed confidence of a child who knew exactly who she was. Other mothers introduced themselves. Hannah introduced herself as Sophie's family friend, which was the form's language, and which felt insufficient for what she was, but accurate for what she could claim, and she was making peace with that distinction when a woman named Linda, whose daughter was Sophie's friend, Abby, leaned over and said, "Sophie talks about you constantly, you know." "Does she?" "You own the bakery on Forsyth Honey and Rye?" "I do. She told Abby that your cinnamon rolls are the best food she's ever eaten, and that you put brown butter in them, which apparently most people don't know is the secret." Hannah looked at Sophie across the table, who was showing Ms. Patterson the lighthouse book with focused intensity. "That's very Sophie," Hannah said. She also said. Linda smiled. "She said her dad is really happy lately, and that you're the reason." Hannah looked at her coffee. "Sorry," Linda said. "Too much." "No." Hannah looked up. "No, that's—" She thought about Caleb on the porch with the December cold and the single word yes, carrying 4 years inside it. "That means a lot." Sophie looked over from across the table, made eye contact with Hannah, gave a small nod of satisfaction, and went back to the lighthouse book. Hannah laughed into her mediocre coffee. The morning daughter brunch became the thing Sophie talked about for 2 weeks, not in a loud declarative way, but in the way she had of dropping information into conversations as established fact. When she talked about it to her grandmother on the phone, when she mentioned it to Caleb at dinner, when she told Dorothy at church in passing. Hannah came. As though that was simply the natural order of events, and always had been. Caleb did not comment on this pattern. Hannah did not comment on it either. They were both by unspoken agreement in the business of letting things be what they were. Christmas at Margaret's house was the confirmation, not a dramatic confirmation, not an announcement or a performance. Just the accumulated evidence of an ordinary holiday. Hannah and Caleb arriving together. Sophie immediately disappearing into the garden with Dorothy to discuss the winter bird population. Caleb helping Margaret move furniture to accommodate the larger gathering. Hannah in the kitchen, making the rolls, because she always made the rolls now, and the whole of it assembled into the picture of something that had settled into place without anyone engineering it. Vanessa pulled Hannah aside in the hallway at some point in the afternoon with the particular energy of a younger sister who had been paying attention. "Okay," Vanessa said. "Okay what?" "He's the real one." Hannah looked at her. "Vanessa, I'm not asking, I'm stating." Vanessa looked toward the living room where Caleb was talking with their Uncle Roy about something that had Roy nodding emphatically, which meant they were talking about either college football or property values. He looks at you like you're the answer to a question he forgot he was asking. Hannah pressed her lips together. Also, Vanessa added, Sophie has reorganized Mom's dessert table by structural integrity, and I think she's actually improved it. She does that. She's wonderful. I know. Vanessa looked at her sister for a moment. Hannah, are you happy? The question was simple, direct. The kind Vanessa asked because she was 28 and newly engaged and currently in the phase of life where she wanted the people she loved to be happy with the urgency of someone who had just discovered what happy felt like herself. Hannah thought about the inventory. The morning coffees and the Thursday afternoons and the porch in December and the hallway in November and a green dress that was now just a dress and a 9-year-old girl who had brought her pieces of chocolate cake in a July garden and changed everything. Yes, she said. Vanessa hugged her. Not the polished kind. The real kind, tight and slightly awkward and completely honest. Good, Vanessa said into her shoulder. Don't mess it up. I'll try not to. And for the record, Daniel was a terrible name for a fake boyfriend. Hannah laughed. He was a structural engineer from Charleston. Nobody believed that. Dorothy did. Dorothy believes everything that confirms what she already suspects. Vanessa pulled back. She suspected Caleb from the moment he walked into the garden. She told me he's the right answer. Dorothy is the wisest person in this family. Hannah looked toward the garden where she could see Sophie and Dorothy in animated conversation through the window, Sophie's hands moving with her characteristic expressiveness. She might be right, Hannah said. The new year arrived. January was cold by Savannah standards and busy in the way. New Years are the particular forward momentum of people who have decided things and are implementing them. Hannah's catering inquiry list had grown steadily through December, and she spent the first 2 weeks of January mapping out what an expanded catering operation would require equipment staff scheduling the capital to float the gap between investment and return. She did not ask Caleb for money. This was important to her. Important enough that she had thought about it explicitly. Named it, made it a deliberate position rather than an assumed one. She was building something. Her building. She had built it from a rented kitchen and a small business loan and her grandmother's recipe book, and 4 years of early mornings, and the next stage was going to come from the same place the first stage had. Caleb did not offer money. He offered to look at her business plan layout on a Tuesday evening when she spread it across his kitchen table and asked him if the structural logic of her expansion timeline made sense to him. He looked at it the way he looked at blueprints, with the focused attention of someone who understood load-bearing things and asked questions that were about her numbers and her reasoning rather than about what he thought she should do. This phase 2 is aggressive, he said. I know. You've got enough buffer. If the first quarter catering comes in where I project, yes. He looked at the numbers. Your projections are conservative. I know. Why? She looked at him across the table. Because I'd rather be pleasantly surprised than wrong. He looked back at her. Something in his expression shifted slightly. You're going to be more than pleasantly surprised. You don't know that. I know your cinnamon rolls, he said. And your lemon pound cake, and your almond croissants. I've watched your line on Saturday mornings go around the block since October. He pushed the business plan back toward her. Your projections are too conservative. Adjust them up. She looked at the plan. Just the projection, he said. It's not a promise. It's a more accurate model. She adjusted them up. She was right about the first quarter. She was also right about herself. The catering expansion launched in February, anchored by a contract with a Savannah event planning company that had found Honey and Rye through a recommendation from a woman who had been at Vanessa's engagement party and had eaten the chocolate cake and asked Margaret for the bakery's card. That chain of connection from a July engagement party where Hannah had arrived, terrified, and left with her hand in a quiet man's, was the kind of thing that was too neat to have planned and too real to dismiss. She hired a part-time baker named Delia, who was 24 and extremely precise about croissant lamination, which was exactly the right thing to be precise about. The back room that Caleb had reframed in October became the prep space for the catering operation. The business expanded not through dramatic transformation, but through the accumulation of good work done consistently. Caleb was present for none of this in any operational sense. He had his own work, his own projects. 3 residential renovations running simultaneously through the winter and a larger commission in the spring that required most of his professional energy. Their lives ran alongside each other, genuinely alongside, in the way of 2 people who had their own trajectories and chose specifically and consistently to be in each other's field of gravity. It was not always easy. The things they had both named in November, his fear of bigness, her fear of the kind sentence, did not resolve because they had been named. They had to be navigated, which was different and required the specific ongoing work of 2 people who were paying attention. There was a Thursday in February when Caleb went quiet in the particular way Hannah had come to understand meant he was somewhere else. The elsewhere that was 4 years ago. A Tuesday morning, a loss that was not background noise, but load-bearing structure. She had learned not to fill that silence. She had learned to sit in it alongside him, which was its own skill, learned through error and correction, and the gradual understanding that being present for someone did not require you to fix the thing that was making them quiet. She put a cup of coffee next to him. He came back from the elsewhere. He looked at the coffee, then at her. "Thanks." "Sophie says you fix things when you're thinking," Hannah said. "I know she says that. You've been staring at that blueprint for 40 minutes without touching it." He looked at the blueprint. "February is..." He stopped. "I know," she said. She did know. Sophie had told her once quietly that February was the month Claire had died. Had offered the information the way Sophie offered important things matter-of-factly, as though the fact deserved to exist in the air between the people it concerned. "You don't have to be okay today," Hannah said. He looked at her. "I mean it. You don't have to be anything today." He held her gaze for a long moment. "I don't know how to do this," he said. Not the relationship she understood immediately, that he meant the grief. The living alongside it. "I spent 4 years thinking I did. Now I'm not sure." "Nobody knows how," she said. "That's not helpful." "I know. I'm not trying to be helpful. I'm trying to be accurate." The corner of his mouth moved slightly. "She was a good person," he said, very quietly. "I know." Hannah looked at him. "Sophie is proof." He looked at the blueprint. His jaw worked once. "I worry sometimes that being happy is..." He stopped again. "Betrayal," she said. "Yes." "Is it?" He was quiet for a moment. "No, I know it's not. I know it rationally." "Knowing rationally and feeling like it's okay are different timelines," she said. "Yeah." She would want Sophie to have a father who was actually living, Hannah said. Not as an argument. As a fact she was willing to offer once and then leave alone. He looked at her. "That's a guess," she added. "I didn't know her. Maybe I'm wrong." "You're not wrong," he said. She nodded. She picked up her own coffee. They sat at his kitchen table on the February Tuesday, with his blueprints spread between them and the morning light coming through the window, and she didn't try to fix the thing that was unfixable, and he didn't perform okay for her benefit. And that was the real version of what they were. Not the party version, not the hedge version, but this 2 people with histories that had weight, choosing to sit with each other's weight, without demanding that it be lighter. Sophie came downstairs at 7:15 with her backpack and her lighthouse book, and looked at them both across the kitchen with the comprehensive assessment of someone who had been paying attention to adults for 4 years. "You okay, Dad?" she said. "Yeah," he said, "getting there." Sophie put her hand on his shoulder for exactly 2 seconds, the specific measured comfort of a child who had learned how much was enough, and then looked at Hannah. "Can I have a cinnamon roll this morning?" "I'll bring them over," Hannah said. "Mathematically perfect," Sophie said, and picked up her backpack. Caleb looked at Hannah across the table. She looked back. "Thank you," he said. "You keep saying that. You keep doing things that warrant it." She recognized her own words from months ago coming back to her in his voice, and she felt something settle in her chest that was warm and specific and entirely without apology. "Go to work," she said. "I'll handle the cinnamon rolls." He gathered his blueprints. At the door, he turned back. Hannah. Yeah. I love you. He said it the same way he said everything directly without performance, as though it were simply a true thing that deserved to be stated. I love you too, she said. Now go. He went. She made the cinnamon rolls. The spring came, and with it, the particular quality of Savannah in March, warm enough to matter the city, exhaling from winter with the ease of a place that had never been too cold to begin with. Hannah expanded the bakery's hours on Saturdays to accommodate the catering prep schedule. Delia turned out to be excellent, which Hannah had suspected and was glad to confirm. The catering revenue in the first quarter came in 12% above the adjusted projection, which meant Caleb had been right about adjusting it, and she had been right to adjust it, and they were both privately pleased about this for different reasons. The anniversary of the engagement party was approaching. Not Vanessa's wedding anniversary. Vanessa and Cole were married in March of the following year, which was a separate occasion. The anniversary of the party itself, the July engagement party where everything had started. Vanessa had mentioned at Christmas that she was planning a small family dinner in late July to mark the year since the engagement. Something intimate. The same house, the same garden, some of the same people. Hannah had said she'd come. She hadn't thought much about it until May, when Vanessa called to confirm details and said with the uncomplicated directness of someone who had decided to just ask the thing, "Is Caleb coming?" "If he wants to," Hannah said. "Does he want to?" "I haven't asked him yet." "Ask him," Vanessa said. And Hannah, "Yeah. It's been a year." "I know. A good year." Hannah sat at her bakery counter with her coffee and looked out the window at Forsyth Street in the May morning. The live oaks were full Spanish moss moving in the slight warm breeze. 2 doors down, she could see the corner of Caleb's porch, the repaired railing straight and solid where it had been broken the July before. "The best year I can remember," she said. She was not speaking to Vanessa. She was speaking to the truth of it, which was the same thing. "Good," Vanessa said. "Ask him." She asked him that evening on his porch, which was where they had most of their real conversations, the porch being the specific place where they had first found each other, where the toolbox had fallen, where things had started. "Vanessa's anniversary dinner," she said. "End of July, same house." "I know," he said. "You want to come?" He looked at her. "Do you want me there?" "Yes." "Then I'll be there." Not hesitation this time. No gap in which interpretation could collapse into the wrong meaning. Just yes. Just I'll be there. She looked at him across the porch in the May evening, a year out from a Friday night, and a toolbox, and a whispered sentence through an azalea hedge. And she thought about the inventory of the year, the real unglamorous specific inventory. The mornings and the Thursdays and the February Tuesday, and the mother-daughter brunch, and the hallway, and the I love you, said to a ceiling in an empty bakery at 9:20 in the morning. The things fixed, and the things named, and the things sat alongside, and the things built slowly, carefully from the ground up, with the patience of people who understood load-bearing structures. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. I don't need a boyfriend anymore." He looked at her. "I mean..." She held his gaze. "I need you, specifically. Not in the way I said that on the phone. Not the borrowed kind, the actual kind." His expression was very still. "I know," he said. "I want us to be clear about that." "We're clear," he said. "Good." He reached for her hand. She was already reaching for his. Their hands met in the May evening on the porch of a narrow Savannah house, easy and unhurried, the specific gesture of two people for whom this had become the natural order of things. Sophie appeared at the front door. "Are you two going to sit there all night, or is someone making dinner?" "Your father is making dinner," Hannah said. "I made dinner last night," Caleb said. "You made sandwiches last night." "Sandwiches are dinner, Sophie," Hannah said. "Should sandwiches count as dinner?" Sophie considered this with great seriousness. Not on a Tuesday, she decided, and went back inside. They looked at each other. "I'll make actual dinner," Caleb said. "I'll help." They went inside. The door closed behind them. And on Forsyth Street, the May evening continued warm and ordinary, and full in the way of a life that had finally been permitted to be exactly what it was. July came back around the way. July always does in Savannah without apology. Full weight, the heat settling into the city, like something that had been waiting all year to return to its rightful place. Hannah noticed it the morning she opened the bakery, and the air outside had that particular quality, thick and warm and smelling of live oak and the river, and she stood in the doorway for a moment before unlocking and thought 1 year. 1 year since a Friday evening and a toolbox and a sentence through a hedge. She went inside and started the prep, and did not make a production of the anniversary, because she was a practical woman and the bakery had orders to fill, but she was aware of it. The way you are aware of certain dates, not with drama, just with the quiet weight of before and after living in the same morning. Caleb texted at 6:52. 1 year since the most embarrassing thing I've ever done. She stared at the text. She typed back, "You didn't do anything embarrassing." "I did." His reply came in 30 seconds. "I dropped a toolbox and then showed up uninvited to a party." She replied, "You were invited. By me. Sort of. Retroactively." He sent back, "That's not how invitations work." She put the phone in her apron pocket and went back to the croissants and was smiling in a way she didn't manage for the first 10 minutes. At 7:15. Sophie appeared at the bakery door in her school uniform backpack on Lighthouse book under her arm, which was its permanent location. Now, regardless of whether the occasion called for it. She had finished the book 4 times and had apparently decided that finishing something did not preclude carrying it. "Dad says to tell you he'll pick up the order for the Hendersons tonight," Sophie said. "I know, we texted." "He also says happy anniversary." Hannah looked at her. "He texted me directly." "I know, he also told me to tell you." Sophie set her backpack on a chair and sat down with the composure of someone who intended to eat something before school. "He's sentimental. He just doesn't like to look sentimental. He sent me a text saying dropping the toolbox was embarrassing." "That's his version of sentimental," Sophie said. "Can I have a cinnamon roll?" Hannah handed her one. Sophie ate it with focused appreciation and then picked up her book and her backpack and said, "Tonight's going to be good," in the tone of someone making an announcement rather than a prediction, and walked out the door. Hannah watched her go. She thought about the first time Sophie had sat at that corner table 3 months into the hedge incident doing homework with focused precision and eating lemon pound cake and saying mathematically perfect in that specific dry way. She thought about how deliberate Sophie had been, not in a manipulative way, not in the way of a child scheming, but in the way of a child who had decided something was worth working toward, and had applied herself with the steady patience of someone who understood that good things required time and consistency. She was 10 now. Sophie had turned 10 in April, and the birthday dinner had been at Hannah's bakery because Sophie had requested it without any apparent awareness that the request was anything other than obvious, and Hannah had made a lemon layer cake with brown butter frosting because that was Sophie's specific preference, and the guests had been Margaret and Aunt Patricia and Dorothy and Vanessa and Cole, and 2 of Sophie's school friends and their parents. And at some point during the evening, Hannah had looked around the bakery at all of those people assembled in her space and understood that this was her life, her actual life. Not the borrowed version, not the managed version, the real one. Vanessa's anniversary dinner was set for the last Saturday of July. The same historic house, the same garden, some of the same people. Hannah spent the morning of the dinner at the bakery, finishing a catering order, and then went home and stood in her closet and looked at clothes with the practical eye of someone who had long since stopped dressing for other people's comfort. She wore a deep blue dress she had bought in March because she liked it, and for no additional reason. She did her hair in the way she liked it, which was down, which she had spent years thinking wasn't right for her face, and had stopped thinking somewhere around November. She knocked on Caleb's door at 5:30. He answered in a gray jacket over a white shirt, which was what he considered dressed up, and which she had decided months ago was the exact right amount. Sophie was beside him in the blue dress, still the blue dress. The same one from the engagement party a year ago, which still fit, because Sophie had her father's lean build and her own refusal to retire things she loved. "You look nice," Sophie told Hannah. "Thank you. You wore the dress. It's a good dress." Sophie examined Hannah with the critical appreciation of someone who cared about aesthetics. The blue is good on you. Ready, Caleb said. He was looking at Hannah the way he had looked at her for a year now, directly without calculation, with the specific quality of someone who had decided to stop being careful about what his face showed when he looked at a particular person. Ready, she said. The drive to Margaret's house took 18 minutes, which was enough time for Sophie to explain in detail a documentary she had watched about the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, and for Caleb to ask 3 intelligent questions, and for Hannah to sit in the passenger seat, listening to both of them and thinking about nothing except how ordinary this felt and how much that meant. The garden at Margaret's house had the particular warmth of a July evening well underway when they arrived, lanterns strung in the live oaks. The guests assembled in the comfortable configuration of people who had been in this space before and knew its rhythms. Dorothy saw them first. She was 82 now and moved with the deliberate energy of someone who had decided that moving carefully was more dignified than not moving, and she crossed to them with her champagne glass and looked at all 3 of them with the comprehensive satisfaction of someone whose assessment of a situation had been proven correct. 1 year, she said. 1 year. Hannah agreed. Dorothy looked at Caleb. You look less terrified than last time. I wasn't terrified last time, Caleb said. You absolutely were. Dorothy patted his arm. You were also extremely well behaved about it. She looked at Sophie. And you. You told me about the lighthouse keepers. I remember, Sophie said. Did you look up the Fresnel lens? I did. Fascinating. Come tell me what else you've learned. She led Sophie away with the comfortable authority of a woman who had decided that Sophie Morgan was one of the more interesting people at any gathering she attended, which was a position she had held since the engagement party and had not revised. Caleb watched them go. Dorothy adopts her. Dorothy recognizes quality, Hannah said. He turned to scan the garden. Ryan's not here. She looked at him. You noticed. I always notice. His voice was easy. Not because it matters, just because I'm an architect. I assess the space. Ryan doesn't matter. I know he doesn't. He looked at her. Does it matter to you that he doesn't matter? She thought about the fundraiser, the sidewalk, the specific heat of that October night when she'd told him, "Don't defend me because you feel sorry for me." She thought about how that sentence had felt like the truest thing she'd said in years, and how the truest things are sometimes the ones that need the most correction afterward. No, she said. It genuinely doesn't. He nodded. He reached out and took her hand, and she gave it to him, and they walked into the garden together. Margaret found them near the drink table within 3 minutes, which was Margaret's version of giving people space. She embraced Hannah first, then turned to Caleb with the warm, specific regard she had developed for him over the year of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, and the occasional Tuesday evening when he came over to fix something she had mentioned in passing, and he had apparently filed away. Caleb. She held his hand in both of hers for a moment. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me, he said. Again. Every time is the real time, Margaret said, which was something she had apparently decided was true, and was now treating as established family doctrine. She looked at Hannah. You look beautiful. Hannah looked at her mother. She thought about a phone call in November, sitting on the bakery floor, with flour on her sleeve. She thought about, I needed you to believe I was enough. She thought about the imperfect specific apology her mother had given, and the imperfect specific way she had received it, and the year of Sunday dinners that had followed, in which something between them had been rebuilt, not identically to what it was, but better because it was honest. Thank you, Mom, she said, not deflecting, not qualifying. Just thank you. The full receipt of the compliment, which was its own kind of decision. Margaret smiled and moved toward another guest, and Hannah stood in the garden of her mother's historic house in the July evening, and felt without commentary like herself. Vanessa appeared with Cole, and the particular radiance of a woman who had been happily married for 4 months, and was still somewhat surprised by how much she liked it. She embraced Hannah, shook Caleb's hand, and immediately looked around for Sophie, who she had developed an independent attachment to, that had nothing to do with Hannah, and everything to do with Sophie, being the kind of person who attracted independent attachments. She's with Dorothy, Hannah said. Of course she is. Vanessa smiled. Those two are a pair. They've been corresponding, Caleb. Hannah looked at him. What? Letters. Sophie writes Dorothy letters. Dorothy writes back. He said it with the composure of someone releasing information he had been sitting on. They've been doing it since the engagement party. Dorothy wrote first. Hannah stared at him. Dorothy told Sophie she had questions about Fresnel lens technology that the documentary hadn't answered. Sophie wrote back with a full bibliography. She's 10, Hannah said. She's Sophie, Caleb said, which was the complete answer. Vanessa was delighted. Cole said, I love that kid, with the genuine simplicity of someone who had met Sophie twice and arrived at a firm conclusion. The evening moved around them in the warm way of gatherings that have the particular energy of people who are actually glad to be in the same place. Aunt Patricia found Caleb at some point in the evening and talked to him for 20 minutes about property values in the historic district, which was a topic on which Caleb had professional opinions, and Patricia had personal ones, and they apparently had a great deal to say to each other. Hannah watched them from across the garden, with the specific pleasure of someone seeing two people she cared about in genuine conversation and not having engineered it. She was standing near the dessert table, which she had contributed to, because it had become an established fact that Hannah brought things to Margaret's gatherings, and Margaret arranged them, and neither of them discussed the protocol, because it was simply what they did when Vanessa's friend Courtney appeared beside her. Courtney was 30 sharp and had been at the engagement party a year ago. She looked at Hannah with the expression of someone about to say something she had been holding for a specific reason. Can I ask you something? Courtney said. Sure. At the engagement party last year. She paused. I heard a rumor. I heard that the man you came with, Caleb, wasn't actually your boyfriend at the time. That it was sort of a... She tilted her head. Favor. Hannah looked at her. Courtney held up a hand. I'm not asking to be mean. I'm asking because... She glanced across the garden at Caleb, who was still in conversation with Patricia. Because you two are the realest-looking couple here, including the newlyweds, and I want to know how that happened from where it started. Hannah considered this for a moment. He heard something he wasn't supposed to hear, she said. And instead of pretending he hadn't, he did something about it. Courtney waited. And then I almost ruined it twice, by deciding in advance that it was going to go wrong. Hannah continued. And he was patient about that. Not in a performing patience way. In the actual way where he just kept showing up. And you, Courtney asked. I stopped managing the distance, Hannah said. I decided that was costing me more than the alternative. Courtney looked at her for a moment. You make it sound simple. It wasn't. Hannah looked across the garden at Caleb, who had finished with Patricia and was now being absorbed into a conversation with Cole and two other men she didn't recognize, standing with the easy composure of someone who was comfortable in rooms. None of it was simple. It was just worth doing anyway. Courtney looked at her for another moment, and then nodded with the expression of someone filing something away for personal use, and said thank you, and moved toward the drink table, and Hannah stood by the dessert table in July, and thought about worth doing anyway, and decided it was the most accurate summary of the past year she had managed. Sophie found her 10 minutes later, coming from the direction of the garden's far end, where Dorothy was apparently now holding court near the roses. She had a small plate with 2 pieces of chocolate cake on it. Hannah looked at the plate. Sophie looked back at her with the expression of someone who was aware that this was a callback and had planned it deliberately. Dorothy says the cake is from your tray, Sophie said. She said it's better than last year's. Last year, she said last year's was the best thing she'd had since her husband was alive. This year, she said this is even better than that, which means it's the best thing she's ever had. Sophie held out the plate. I got 2. Hannah took one. Dad's over there, Sophie said, nodding toward where Caleb was standing. He should probably have the other one. Hannah looked at her. Sophie looked back with absolute composure. Go give it to him yourself, Hannah said. I could. Sophie considered. But you should. It's more... She thought about the word. Symmetrical. We're at the same party, 1 year later, same cake. It's symmetrical. Sophie said it with the finality of someone who had thought this through. Also, I want to go back to Dorothy. She's telling me about the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and the engineering failures that made it worse. It's very relevant to structural architecture. Go, Hannah said. Sophie handed her the plate and walked back across the garden with the purposeful stride of a 10-year-old with places to be. Hannah stood there with 2 pieces of chocolate cake. She walked across the garden. Caleb saw her coming and separated from the conversation with the ease of someone who had been waiting for exactly this without saying so. He looked at the plate. Dorothy's assessment, he said. Best thing she's ever had. High bar. She's had 82 years of things. Hannah held out the plate. He took one. They stood in the garden in July, a year out from the first time they'd done this, and ate chocolate cake in the warm evening, and neither of them made a speech about it, because neither of them was that kind of person, which was one of the things they had in common, and one of the reasons this had worked. Someone asked me tonight, Hannah said, how we went from what we were to what we are. Caleb looked at her. What'd you say? I said you showed up, and I stopped managing the distance. He was quiet for a moment. That's accurate. I thought so. He ate his cake. She ate hers. Hannah, he said. Yeah. He looked at her with the directness he had always brought to looking at her from the very beginning, from the porch and the hedge and the dark jacket on a Saturday afternoon, the same quality of attention that had never required performance from either of them. I need to tell you something. She looked back at him. Okay. I've been thinking about it since February. He said it the way he said things he had considered carefully. And then again in April, and pretty much continuously since May. She waited. He was quiet for 3 seconds, which from Caleb was equivalent to clearing his throat. I don't want to be your neighbor anymore, he said. The garden continued around them, laughter from across the grass. Someone's phone playing something soft near the house. Dorothy's voice carrying from the rose beds. Hannah looked at him. He stopped, gathered. I want to come home to the same house. Not. He shook his head slightly. Not to merge things or erase anything. Not to give Sophie a mother because Sophie chose you separately, and that's hers, and I don't get to make it into something else. Not to solve anything. Just. He met her eyes. I want to stop crossing the yard. I want to stop the hedge being the thing between us. Hannah held very still. I'm not asking you to decide tonight, he said. I know it's Vanessa's dinner, and I know the timing is. Yes, Hannah said. He stopped. She looked at him. Yes. The word was quiet and unambiguous, and carried everything she had decided about being done with careful and done with managed distance, and done with the borrowed version of things. You're sure, he said. Caleb. She held his gaze. I built a whole business in a rented kitchen. I know when something is worth the risk. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, the azalea hedge is going to be a problem. The root encroachment is real. She stared at him. I've been meaning to mention it for months. She laughed. The real laugh, the loud, undignified, completely honest one. And it went out across the garden, and several people turned to look, and she did not manage it or contain it or apologize for it. Caleb was smiling. The specific smile that appeared rarely, and was all the more recognizable for it. We can figure out the hedge, she said. We can, he agreed. Sophie's going to be insufferable about being right. Sophie has been insufferable about being right since September. She has, Hannah said. She earned it. He took her hand. She gave it to him. Same as always, easy and unhurried, the gesture of 2 people for whom this was the natural order. Across the garden, Sophie emerged from the rose beds with Dorothy and looked toward them with the comprehensive assessment she had been running for a year. She saw the cake plates, the joined hands, the particular quality of her father's expression that she had been waiting to see since before she had the words for what she was waiting for. She looked at Dorothy. Dorothy looked back at her. Called it, Sophie said. 11 months ago, Dorothy said. I called it first. You called it second. I called it the moment they walked in that gate. Dorothy gestured with her champagne glass. I know what a man looks like when he's been in love with someone for a while. I know what a woman looks like when she's about to stop being scared, Sophie said. Dorothy considered this. Fair. We both called it. Simultaneously, Sophie agreed. From different angles. Complementary perspectives. Exactly. Dorothy clinked her glass gently against Sophie's cup of sparkling water. You're going to be interesting to know for a very long time, Sophie Morgan. Sophie looked at that. You too, she said, and meant it completely. Across the garden, Hannah watched this exchange from a distance without being able to hear it, and she looked at Caleb and said, What do you think they're talking about? Us, he said without hesitation. Obviously. She looked at Sophie and Dorothy, at the two of them in easy conversation with the aligned energy of people who had recognized each other as equals despite 52 years of difference. How long has she been corresponding with Dorothy? Since August of last year. She was 9. She wrote a very thorough first letter. He watched his daughter. 3 pages, with footnotes. Hannah looked at Sophie. She thought about a Thursday afternoon in October lemon curd. Sophie's hands moving with the specific expressiveness she brought to things she cared about. Do you like him? Yes. Good. She thought about the brunch in December, the form that said, Family Friend, Sophie's hand on her father's shoulder for exactly 2 seconds in February. She thought about a child who had done the lighthouse keeper's job, who had decided something was worth staying in, and had stayed. She's remarkable, Hannah said. I know, Caleb said. The way he said it, simple and absolute and carrying everything, was the complete answer to the complete question. The evening moved toward its end, in the way of good evenings. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the particular easing of people who have had enough of a good thing and are ready to carry it home. Vanessa gave a toast that was short and warm, and made Margaret tear up in a way she would later deny. Cole said something that made Dorothy laugh loudly. Patricia had apparently agreed to correspond with Sophie about historic preservation architecture in the Savannah district, which was a natural development that neither of them found surprising. On the drive home, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes out. Same as the year before. Same posture, same complete surrender to sleep that children managed with an ease adults had long since lost. Caleb and Hannah drove in the quiet that contained things. I'm going to have to sell the house, he said, after a few miles. She looked at him. Or rent it. The Forsyth Street house. He was looking at the road. Haven't decided which. You don't have to decide that tonight. I know. A pause. I've been deciding things tonight. You have. Was it the right night for it? She thought about symmetry. About Dorothy's cake in July and 1 year. About the particular rightness of things that came back around to where they started and were different this time, because the people involved were different, because they had done the work of becoming different. Yes, she said. He nodded. The rest of the drive was quiet in the good way. When they pulled onto Forsyth Street, the live oaks were dark against the summer sky. The neighborhood settled into its late evening quiet. Caleb parked at the curb. Sophie was still deeply asleep. He got out and opened the back door and lifted Sophie the way Hannah had seen him do it once before a year ago. The same motion, careful and practiced and completely without drama. Sophie didn't wake. He carried her to his door. Hannah followed. Inside. Sophie was settled in her room. Shoes off, lighthouse book, relocated to the nightstand, with the efficiency of a parent who had done this many times. In the hallway, Caleb turned. Hannah was standing there. 1 year. Same hallway. Different, everything different, because they had chosen to make it different, one specific decision at a time. I love you, she said. Because she had made a decision a year ago to say true things when she had them, and this was a true thing she had every day, and tonight it wanted to be said. I love you, he said back. Simple and direct as a load-bearing wall. I'll go home, she said. Okay. But not for much longer. No, he said. Not for much longer. She walked out his door, down his porch steps, 6 feet to her own door, the same path she had walked 100 times in a year. She stood on her porch for a moment and looked at the hedge. The azalea hedge. The one with the real encroachment problem. The one that had been growing along that property line since before either of them had moved to Forsyth Street. She thought it's going to need to come out. She thought that's fine. She went inside. In the morning, there would be coffee and honey and rye and Delia's precise croissants and the catering calendar that had grown from guarded projections into something real, and a 10-year-old who would appear at the corner table with a library book and a new set of facts she found urgent to share. There would be Caleb at 6:40 on the sidewalk, and Sunday dinners at Margaret's and Dorothy's letters, and Patricia's opinions, and the ordinary accumulation of a life being built, not through transformation or rescue, or the borrowed version of something someone else had, but through the slow, consistent, honest work of two people who had decided to stop making themselves small. There would be all of it, and none of it would be borrowed. Hannah Brooks went to sleep in her narrow house on Forsyth Street in the July heat, and she did not apologize for the space she took up, and she did not calculate the distance to the nearest exit, and she did not wait for the kind sentence that started with "but." She had asked once, whispered through an azalea hedge on a Friday night, for something temporary. Something borrowed. Just a boyfriend until tomorrow. Something to get her through a room without having to face it alone. What she had gotten instead was a man who dropped a toolbox and showed up in a jacket and held her hand through every room since "Who Said I Love You" without performance, and fixed things, because he was thinking about her, and stayed simply and completely, and without being asked to. What she had gotten was a 10-year-old who brought her pieces of chocolate cake and chose her separately and deliberately and meant it. What she had gotten was her own life, not the managed version, not the borrowed version, not the version that apologized for existing, but the real one, fully inhabited, fully hers, the kind that was worth all the terrifying work of letting